The Fall of Eternity. Act 3. Pyrite felt the mountain shake. Before he could fully turn in search of the source, he was blown off his feet and crashed to the black brick beneath him. His breath caught in his throat, not because of the impact, but because of what he saw. The astral atrium was gone, replaced by an enormous explosion of dazzling colors. Much of the central keep was consumed by the ever-expanding sphere of light until, all at once, it vanished. Pyrite was left in the waning light of the evening sun. Snow began to fall on the besieged castle. Pyrite sat up and held out a hand, watching as a snowflake landed on it. He clenched his fist and got to his feet. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he couldn't afford to remain distracted. He turned from the eviscerated ruin of the central keep and ran down the black brick of the northern bridge. The Spellweaver's villa stood tall before him, and his eyes caught on the circular stained glass window that looked out from between the tall pillars. On the window was the sigil of the house, emblazoned in purples and silvers, the image of an overturned hourglass, its sands no longer falling. Pyrite turned his gaze down from the proud emblem and pushed past the large entrance doors. The foyer was empty and dark, like that of the central keep before. Unwelcome memories pushed their way into his mind as he looked around the room. He suppressed them and ran up the grand marble steps to the second floor, and then deeper into the villa. How many generations of Spellweavers had passed through these halls, he wondered. The weight of history pressed upon him as he ran down the corridor. But, despite his wandering mind, who he was looking for wasn't in the villa, but past it. Pyrite opened a final door at the back of the villa and was greeted by cold, tempestuous wind slamming against his exposed face. It grabbed the door from his grip and ripped it off its hinges. It fell away into the blanket of snow that poured over the mountains. Through the blizzard before him, Pyrite could see the sky above rotating like a cyclone. Whatever that explosion had been, it had disturbed the sky, causing this white hurricane. "Seriously?" he asked. He manifested a heavy cloak, pulled the hood over his face, and stepped onto the black brick. The Tower of Kulvath loomed beyond the short bridge. He used his glaive's spiked lower haft to steady his steps as he forced his way through the snow and wind. The violent gusts threatened to throw Pyrite over the edge, but he pushed on, manifesting spikes that extended from his boots to dig into the growing blanket of white that covered the black brick. Finally, he reached the tower entrance and was practically blown inside. Pyrite pushed the door closed and set his hand against it. He willed the door to change, and it attached to the stone wall, locking it shut. He knew it wouldn't stop the invaders, but it would at least give him some warning. He turned and glanced around. Unlike the villa before, magical lights hung suspended in air and cast the steps before him in a light blue glow. As he ascended the tower, he wondered what he would say, wondered how he could explain. The Spellweavers were one thing, but the Matriarch was something else entirely. Pyrite's chest grew tight as he imagined their coming conversation. He reached the top of the tower and extended a hand towards the door, but he hesitated. And that's when he smelled smoke. His own worries overtaken, Pyrite shoved the door open and rushed inside. He looked around the room, searching for both the Matriarch and the source of the smell. But the room was empty, barring the many open cabinets and spilled catalytic ingredients. Panic gripped him. Where was she? The Spellweavers had told him she was here. Pyrite's thoughts fell silent as his eyes found the source of the smell. He rushed to the open window and saw flames. The entire central keep was on fire. Eons of history burned bright red against the falling snow. He felt weak as he watched the flames spread. It's not enough that they destroy us. They'll burn our memory to ash. Through the snow, Pyrite could see the bridge leading from the central keep to the villa. He saw the three figures walking down it, and a growl rose from his throat. Segrid. Suddenly, something moved behind him, and Pyrite wheeled, glaive raised. Before him, a small stone golem stood, unfazed by Pyrite's threatening blade. When Pyrite recognized the golem, he lowered his weapon and breathed a sigh of relief. Ven. Where's the Matriarch? The small construct, which served as the matriarch's personal assistant, turned away from him and half walked, half waddled over to one of the counters that lined the room. Its emotionless voice, semi-sentient as it was, appeared in Pyrite's mind via telepathy.
The matriarch is on the west side patio.
Of course she'd be in her grove. Pyrite rushed toward the door, but the golem wasn't done talking.
I was sent to retrieve further drakebone chalk and hellcat hair.
Pyrite looked back at the golem, who was reaching his small stone arms up toward the countertop.
Help.
Pyrite sighed and set his glaive against the wall. He walked over, picked up the golem, grabbed the ingredients it pointed out, and headed back to the stairway. So she really is still trying to complete the ritual, he thought.
Yes, the matriarch is certain she is on the verge of getting it right.
Ven interjected. Pyrite looked at the golem. Ven, get out of my head. The golem looked back at him. The 2 rubies the matriarch had set into its head to serve as faux eyes glinted as they passed the floating lights.
Understood.
After a few more moments in silence, they reached a set of double doors Pyrite had passed on his way to the matriarch's lab. He set the golem down, pushed the doors open, and felt a chill run down his back. In front of him stretched a large field of flowers. Midway into the field rose 2 proud conifer trees, dwarfed only by the walls of rock that towered high on both sides of the square grove. The sheer rock face shone smooth, where the matriarch's matter manipulation magic had sheared away what had once been a mountain. In the center of the field stood a fountain trickling water through some magical process. The grove, which Pyrite felt to be entirely out of place on these frigid peaks, served as the preferred space for the matriarch, who had found the Tower of Kulvath too claustrophobic for her tastes and purposes. Pyrite followed the stone brick path that ran down the center. At the fountain, the path split in 3. One path continued up to the patio at the back of the grove, while the other 2 circled the trees before joining back at the center, forming the overturned hourglass that was Perpetuum's sigil. That was when Pyrite noticed the lack of snow on both the grove and the patio steps he approached. He looked up and saw that overhead, a dome barrier glowed, keeping the furious sky at bay. And as he looked back down, having just reached the steps, another chill ran through him. From the moment he had opened the doors, it had felt like something was watching him. And as the 2 made their way up the steps, he saw the many gargoyles perched atop the marble pillars ringing the grove. They sat there, in their death-like stone stillness, but Pyrite knew they were watching him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that even he wasn't welcome here. Finally, as he reached the top of the steps, he found her. Alone in the center of a large summoning circle that had clearly been drawn and redrawn was Matriarch Xaramaliss Perpetuum. She knelt over one of the intricate patterns chalked onto the stone, looking from the etching to the book in her hand, then back again. Dust covered her hands and the bottom of her silver-lined robes. Pyrite's heart sank when he saw her tear-stricken cheeks. Ven walked up and handed her the ingredients, and she looked from the golem to Pyrite.
Pyrite?
She looked back down.
Sigil is dead.
Pyrite felt the blood drain from his face, and he hung his head. He had just seen the old spellweaver. He opened his mouth to speak, and found it too dry to form words. The matriarch continued.
He shared his memories with me just before he died. So Osgarath and the guard have fallen as well?
Pyrite cleared his throat. Yes, along with my team. She looked at him.
This day has taken much then. I must make sure it's worth it.
She released the book in her hand, and it floated to a pile of tomes outside the circle.
That one is another fake. Of the 29 we found, 15 have been fakes. Which means the final tome is still out there. The final piece of the ritual. Just out of reach.
Pyrite met her gaze, concern in his eyes. So you can't complete the ritual?
I didn't say that. From what I've been able to gather, only this section of the summoning circle is incomplete.
She pointed to the repeatedly erased section of the circle she knelt over.
Every time I try to cast the summon, the lines of power collapse right here. That final tome contains the final piece of the puzzle, yes. But if I use what I do know from the other sections of the circle and my own knowledge of our history, I should be able to brute force it.
Pyrite looked at the large circle drawn onto the stone around them. It, like the overlapping paths around the fountain, formed the Perpetuum sigil, the symbol of eternity. The whole circle was made from etheric runes that, Pyrite was sure, told some tale of Perpetuum history. That was how these ancient rituals always worked. Both magic and history entwined into one. Matriarch, Segrid and his honor guard are right behind me. The rest of the house has already retreated to Neveos. We don't have time for you to guess at this. We have to— She stood up from where she knelt and walked past him, looking over the grove.
Pyrite, tell me, what did you see during your time with House Neveos?
Confused, he said, They're casters who specialize in ice magic?
Oh, I meant, what were they like? Their leader, their people, their culture.
Pyrite recalled the time he had fought alongside the casters of House Neveos during one of their yearly wars against their southern neighbor, House Aduro. They're militaristic, aggressive, but at their core, they're opportunistic cowards. They only ever attacked when they had an advantage and saw little shame in abandoning those they fought alongside. Aggravation at the memory burned in Pyrite's heart.
Opportunistic cowards,
She echoed.
And we have just sent all that remains of our house to hide within their walls. How long, I wonder, before they feel that the agreement you brokered with them is no longer sufficient payment? How long before they turn on us, on our people?
And we should have fought! Made those Imperiosus bastards bleed for every step!
We would certainly have lost, and our house would have faded into obscurity. No, this was the only viable choice.
She turned back and locked him with an intense stare.
But if I can complete the ritual, summon the Hellbeast, then not only will our house not fade. No, instead we will rise, return to the glory we once held.
But Matriarch, we don't have enough time.
I will not be known as the Matriarch who let Perpetuum fall a second time,
She shouted. Then, quieter, she added,
Not while there is still a chance.
Pyrite looked at her tear-stricken eyes. Then you'd best get to work. He started past her, but she stopped him, and placing a hand on his shoulder, she whispered,
You need not die here.
He grasped her hand and pushed it away from him. Don't you dare, he growled, a slight quiver in his voice. Oz entrusted me with your safety. I'll be damned if I'm gonna be teleported away again. If you're staying, I'm staying. She stared at him, and Pyrite saw pride mixed with a tinge of sadness in her red eyes.
I understand. But at least allow me this.
Her staff appeared in her hand, and she touched it to Pyrite's lamellar chestplate. With a flash of magical power, he began to glow as she cast the protective barrier over him. The glow faded from sight, but he could still feel its protection.
This will strengthen both you and your armor.
He could feel the fatigue of the previous battle lessening, the pain in his wounds waning. Shouldn't you save your mana for the summoning? As he asked the question, he recalled the crystal that Zagil had given him. He took it from the pouch on his belt, where he had stored it, and held it before her. Actually, Zagil gave this to me. Surely it'll be of more use to you. The Matriarch looked at the glowing crystal. It was one of the few magic crystals Perpetuum had left. She reached out and closed Pyrite's hand around it.
You need not worry about me. Zagil entrusted it to you. It is you who will make the greatest use of it.
Ven, who had been standing by silently, suddenly perked up.
Intruders have entered the tower,
He warned. Pyrite looked at Ven and returned the crystal to its pouch. He took a deep breath, summoned his glaive, and turned toward the door. Well, I suppose the time has come,
So it has.
she replied. But her voice came twice, and Pyrite turned to see two matriarchs standing before him. It was a perfect copy, with all the same abilities and even a combined consciousness. The double summoned her staff and walked up alongside him.
You will not fight alone.
Pyrite smiled, and he and the double walked down the steps as the original matriarch got back to work. They stopped just after the fountain and awaited their foes. Pyrite took his place in front of the matriarch as they began to hear the heavy footfalls from outside the tower door. He raised his glaive to guard and turned his head to look back at the double. Can you do it? Can you summon the beast? The matriarch before him met his gaze, her eyes burning with determination.
Yes.
Good. I trust you. Mother, he said, as his helmet materialized around his face. The door exploded out in a shower of splinters and rent steel. Pyrite took a deep breath as out from the rising dust walked the honor guard, with Segrid right behind. Pyrite's weapon, already reformed into a spear, shot from his grip, a blur of steel and wood streaking across the grove. The honor guard lunged forth and swatted it from the air with a swing of his axe. From over Pyrite's head, a boulder that dwarfed the great pines was flung toward the invaders. As it reached them, the matriarch opened her outstretched hand, and the boulder turned red-hot and erupted, showering molten magma over its targets.
I don't think so,
said a voice within both of their minds. Suddenly, a beam of green flame shot out from beneath the falling magma. It consumed the molten rock and carried on toward Pyrite and the double. The double raised her staff and a barrier appeared before them. The beam impacted and exploded out, disintegrating the grass, flowers, and bushes around them, everything it touched turning to dust. As it waned, Pyrite let out a growl. Segrid and his honor guard walked toward them unharmed, and behind them was someone Pyrite knew all too well. Disgust boiled within him as the traitor stepped into the grove.
Oh, Sargal,
whispered the double. The spellweaver, still wrapped in the embroidered purple robes of House Perpetuum, stood beside Segrid and his two remaining honor guard.
Hello, Matriarch.
His croaking words carried the venom of hatred. Before the pair could start slinging insults or spells, Segrid spoke, not to the matriarch, but to Pyrite. You must be the mercenary who led the defense outside. Pyrite gave no reply. Rather, he was eyeing Sargal. That was him in my mind a moment ago, right? Is that going to be a problem? He asked.
I'm blocking any further intrusion. What are our chances here?
The matriarch asked in return. Terrible. Pyrite sighed internally. We're outnumbered, and while I might be able to hold out against one honor guard, I have no delusions of my chances against two. And I have no chance against Sargal. The admittance hurt his pride, but this was no time for ego. Even worse, I have no idea what tricks Segrid might have up his lordly sleeves. Segrid continued, unaware of the telepathic conversation. Why die for a doomed house? The Lord reached out a hand in offering. Join me, and you will know wealth and glory more than you can possibly imagine. Pyrite turned his eyes back on the Lord. Were this any other case, were Segrid any other lord, Pyrite might have genuinely considered the offer. But this was different. You don't seem to know who I am, Lord. I'm not just a mercenary. Segrid narrowed his eyes as the Perpetuum banner appeared on the haft of Pyrite's glaive. I am Pyrite Perpetuum, son of Matriarch Xaramaliss Perpetuum. A sadistic smile crossed Pyrite's face. And I will be the one to claim your head. As Pyrite finished speaking, the double rose into the air, staff glowing with power. Segrid frowned and waved a hand to his honor guard. Then you will die with your house. At his word, Sargal's staff flared and the honor guard raised their axes. A blast of vicious lightning shot from Sargal's staff and spidered through the air toward the double. She barely had time to raise a barrier, and it cost her. As the bolt slammed into the barrier, it collapsed. The blast sent her flying back across the grove and into the steps. In the next moment, Sargal vanished, having teleported after the matriarch's double. Pyrite was just about to give chase when the matriarch's words reached his mind.
Focus on the enemy before you. I'll handle this damned traitor.
Her voice carried no sign of the impact she had just taken. From beneath his helmet, Pyrite smiled at his mother's confidence. Sargal had long been the house's foremost offensive caster, and he was a monster at that. But where he was a monster, the matriarch was like that of the old gods. The larger honor guard lunged forward, axe raised. The red scale of his armor blurred in Pyrite's vision. He was fast, faster than anyone his size had any right being. Pyrite wanted to dodge out of the way of the descending axe, but couldn't. All he could do was raise his glaive to block. It was a mistake. Pyrite's eyes went wide as the full force of what felt like a stone Goliath crashed into and nearly through his block. His legs gave, and he fell to one knee, just barely holding the hungry axe a mere hand's width from his shoulder. With the blade so close, he could make out the carvings of runes. Pyrite released his block, letting the axe blade fall against his gorget. As it did, the runes ignited and the whole blade glowed orange. It let out a vicious hiss as it contacted the barrier surrounding him, coughing sparks as it tried to burn its way through. Pyrite roared and thrust his glaive's curved blade into the armored abdomen of the honor guard with as much strength as he could muster. It slammed against the hard scales and stopped, but it was enough. The demon rocked back and his axe came off Pyrite's shoulder with a crackling pop of arcane fury. Pyrite got to his feet. Whatever that weapon was, it was clearly imbued with some kind of magic. Pyrite gave thanks that the Matriarch had cast the barrier over him, as without it, he didn't even want to imagine. He glanced at the other honor guard still standing beside Segrid at the entrance to the grove. His axe too bore the markings of runes, but they were different and looked burnt out. Do each of them bear different artifact weapons? He wondered. The honor guard in red hadn't re-engaged. He was just standing there, head cocked to the side as if studying Pyrite. The large demon tapped a finger on the haft of his axe, and a feeling of nostalgia hit Pyrite. Pyrite ignored the feeling. In his left hand, he manifested a spear and drove it into the dirt behind him, a contingency he knew he would need. Then he charged, glaive raised high. The honor guard reacted. Quick as ever, he swung his axe to parry the descending blade. Pyrite pulled the strike and watched as the axe swung through empty air. As he reached striking range, he rotated the glaive and thrust its deadly spike straight toward the red demon's throat. The honor guard's gauntleted hands shot out and caught the haft, stopping it. Pyrite tried to pull his weapon free, but found he was no match for the larger demon's strength. The honor guard pulled him close and sent a kick into his abdomen. Pyrite flew back, tumbling through the air, and into the backup spear, just as planned. He grasped it, landed on his feet, and launched it, aiming right for his opponent's head. With no time to react, the demon instinctively dodged, and as the spear passed him, he realized what he had done. The spear tore through the air toward its true target, Segrid. The second honor guard didn't react in time, and the spear gave a loud crack as it tore through the door behind them. Lordly blood fell from the gash in Segrid's cheek. His head cocked to one side, he let out a furious growl as he glared at Pyrite. He had dodged death, but his pride smoldered like the fiery red of his eyes. Pyrite, breathing hard, manifested a new glaive and pointed it at the Lord. "I told you, didn't I?" he declared through labored breaths. "I'll be claiming your head." Before Segrid could respond, the honor guard before him gave a hearty laugh.
"It is you! I'd recognize that arrogance anywhere!"
The guard threw his axe onto his shoulder and, with his offhand, removed the skull mask from his helmet. For a moment, Pyrite's focus faltered, because he knew that face. "Akarath!" he demanded.
"It took me a moment to remember, but only you would have the gall to disrespect a lord so directly,"
he bellowed in his rough voice.
"Oh, how I've missed that."
Pyrite, his surprise fading quickly, maintained his guard, watching Akarath closely. Old companion or no, he was fighting for Segrid now. "Last time I saw you, you were fighting in the Bellicose Arena. What happened? Did the blood-choked sand prove too much for you?" Akarath gave another chuckle, though it was quieter than before.
"That was a century ago, Pyrite. And besides, Lord Segrid pays rather well."
The two were circling each other now. The second honor guard stood in front of Segrid, ensuring Pyrite could not strike him again. The Lord had fallen surprisingly quiet, likely wanting to see if Akarath could get through to Pyrite.
"You really ought to consider his offer. If you swear yourself to his service, he may still let you live."
Pyrite scowled. "Oh, you think I should consign my soul to him just to survive?" Akarath sighed, his pleased expression falling to a frown.
"It's not so bad."
Pyrite's eyes went wide. "He owns you." Amongst demonkind, contracts carry weight beyond what is penned, and nowhere else is it more true than for those of the Mercenary League. But if one were to break contract, to disobey or go against what was agreed to, they would find their souls claimed by the contract holder for eternity. It was why mercenaries were used so often, because disobedience meant permanent enslavement. Akarath stopped walking and turned toward him.
"The pay was too good. Anyway, where are the others? I didn't see them outside."
A mixture of emotions welled within Pyrite's heart. They died a long time ago. The large demon gave an understanding nod.
Pity. And those 2 new ones, they were yours?
Were. The word caught in Pyrite's ears, and what minuscule hope had remained began to crumble. So they are, he asked, voice shaking. Akadoth met his gaze and gave a resigned smile.
They fought well. Anger.
A curse placed on him by his past that had followed him his entire life. That ever-smoldering urge that always threatened to take control and leave a path of destruction in its wake. He had spent nearly 2 centuries learning to control it, to take hold of the reins and make it do his bidding. But in that moment, Pyrite released the reins, and it carried him forth as he shot toward Akadoth, glaive swinging down toward his old friend's exposed face. Akadoth hadn't expected the sudden charge, but still, he dodged out of the way of the falling blade. Pyrite let the weight of the glaive carry the bladed head down and swung the end of the weapon, already reformed into a sword, toward the demon's face. Akadoth threw up his offhand and caught the strike on his vambrace. But before he could grab hold of the weapon and turn the fight in his favor, Pyrite released it. Ducking low, he dove into the larger demon with his whole weight. He howled with rage as he tried to bring his opponent to the ground. Akadoth staggered back, but remained standing. He grabbed hold of his axe and brought it high, about to drive its spiked end into the back of Pyrite. But he hesitated. He turned the weapon sideways and brought the darkwood haft down on the back of Pyrite's helmet, sending him crashing to the floor.
Pyrite, stop! Don't make me kill you!
Pyrite growled as pain seared through his head, but it didn't matter. Not anymore. He hadn't even heard Akadoth's plea. All he could think of was killing the bastards before him. They had to pay. He would make them pay. Rage consumed his very being, and he poured mana into his gauntlets. Hooked talons extended from the fingertips, and he grabbed at the legs of Akadoth before him. The talons found his unarmored calves and cleaved bloody trenches into them. Akadoth howled and fell backward, his axe clattering to the ground. Pyrite wasted no time. He pounced like a hellcat onto his prey. A dagger materialized in his hand, and he brought it down point first toward Akadoth's face. Akadoth caught his arms, holding the shaking blade a finger's width from his eye. Pyrite roared as he pushed harder, trying to break past the demon's desperate block. Suddenly, an axe slammed into Pyrite's side, throwing him off of Akadoth and into one of the great pines. The second honor guard pulled Akadoth to his unsteady feet and gave him back his dropped axe. Akadoth took the axe.
Pyrite,
he began, but before he could finish, Segrid stepped forward and cut him off.
Captain Akadoth, enough of this foolishness! Kill him!
As Segrid said the words, Akadoth stood up a little straighter, and his eyes flashed before his expression turned cold. Akadoth grabbed his skull mask from his belt, and, glowing eyes never leaving Pyrite, put it back on over his face.
Yes, my lord.
For a moment, Pyrite's fury had faltered, and he lay there on a bed of pine needles, trying to catch his breath. The blow had dented in the lamellar plates on his side, and he could feel them pushing into the padded coat beneath. Pain radiated from beneath the crushed plates. He clenched his fist, only to recall that he had dropped his glaive a while ago. They were coming again. 2 slaves to Segrid's will. He could see them approaching, axes at their side. Clearly, they didn't think he was much of a threat anymore. He expended more of his dwindling mana reserves into his hand, and a new glaive assembled itself in his grip. He didn't have much mana on the best of days, and today was not the best of days. His material transmutations and weapon summonings didn't cost too much to cast, that's why he used them. But still, he would run out soon. I need that on. Think I'll be joining you after all. He planted the spike of his glaive into the dirt and heaved himself up. His gaze snapped from Akadoth to the second honor guard, then to Segrid. His fury reignited and adrenaline coursed through his veins. He raised his glaive to guard and charged at the approaching demons. They reacted, swinging their axes at him from both sides. Pyrite parried the blow from Akadoth and took the second on his pauldron. Plates bent as the axe slammed into his shoulder. Pyrite let out a growl and kicked the second honor guard in the abdomen, sending him stumbling back. His shoulder free, Pyrite grabbed Akadoth's axe with his offhand and thrust his glaive's blade toward the red demon's throat. Once again, Akadoth caught the weapon by its haft, but Pyrite had expected this. He wrenched both weapons toward him, pulling Akadoth in, and slammed his armored head against the demon's skull mask. He felt it dent in, and Akadoth recoiled. Pyrite released the axe and pulled his glaive back to strike, but a second axe slammed into the exposed horn on the side of his head and sent him reeling. The shock of it stunned him, but he was recovered by a surge of adrenaline and turned to face his attacker. A second blow came, the axe swinging in an arc for his abdomen. Pyrite couldn't react fast enough, and the blade slammed into him. It sent him skidding, but he found his footing and pushed past the axe, closing the distance between them. He threw his glaive over the demon's head and tried to wrench him to the ground. He felt the honor guard punching him in the abdomen over and over. Just as he was about to pull his opponent off his feet, Akadoth's axe slammed into his back. The runes along its blade ignited against the magical barrier. Pain shot up his spine and he released his grip, his glaive clattering to the floor behind the honor guard. His legs felt wobbly, but he grasped onto the honor guard before him and sent a fist into his skull mask. Metal clanged against metal, and Pyrite fused his gauntleted knuckles to the mask before wrenching it off. Hate-filled eyes greeted him. Pyrite reached back, planning to punch the bastard with his own mask. But he didn't get to, as, with one hand, Akadoth grabbed Pyrite by the back of his gorget and pulled him off his comrade. With a heave, he shoved him to the ground, kneeling on his back. He looked up at his comrade and nodded. Pyrite raged, trying to grab at Akadoth, trying to wriggle free, but he couldn't. He was trapped. Why were they so strong? Akadoth had always been a beast, but this was something else entirely. Then he saw the answer. Off to the side, with an expression of sadistic satisfaction, was Segrid, and around his neck was an amulet of glowing gold. The way it glowed, Pyrite knew, even in his rage-addled state, it meant it was an artifact. It seemed to wash over the two honor guard. The second honor guard got into position beside them and raised his axe like the executioner he was. Pyrite looked up at the ravenous blade. It looked much bigger from where he lay. Fury filled his eyes, and they grew brighter as he cast the spell. Self-destruct. It wouldn't be much of an explosion, he knew that. But it would at least take the damned honor guard with him.
Pyrite, hold your breath!
Cried the matriarch. Pyrite reined in his anger and halted the spell, craning his head to look up. There he saw her, the matriarch's double floating above the stairs, her hand raised toward the barrier above them. The honor guard, too, were staring up at her, registering her as the greater threat. Then, all at once, the barrier vanished, and thousands of pounds of snow that had piled up on its surface fell onto the grove. It crashed into them, burying them alive. 3 days prior.
The matriarch took her seat at the head of the long table. The room around her, the Spellweaver's council chamber, was lit by blue flames that hung suspended in the air. 8 of the 9 Spellweavers bowed their heads respectfully from where they sat around the table. One of the chairs, the one just to the left of the matriarch, was empty. Her eyes caught on the empty chair. It was so unlike him to miss a meeting, especially an emergency meeting. "What's the situation?" the matriarch asked. Osgarath, on the right side of the table, stood with a polite nod.
Matriarch, House Imperiosus has crossed the border en masse. My conjurers are claiming they number in the tens of thousands.
The matriarch narrowed her eyes. "It's hardly the first time. The teleportation traps will send them back."
That's just it, my lady. The traps aren't working. Well...
The old Spellweaver fell silent, at a loss for how to explain. Solmar, seated opposite Osgarath, cut in.
It's not that they're not working, they're being disabled.
The matriarch's eyes widened for a moment, before again narrowing with confusion. "Disabled?" she echoed. "How?" The Spellweavers exchanged concerned glances, and the matriarch raised an eyebrow at their uncharacteristic nervousness. Finally, Zagil spoke from his seat at the far end of the table. His voice was low and barely hid his fury.
What they are afraid to tell you is this.
He raised his staff, and the gem at its top glowed with arcane power. A portal opened above the table and showed the massive Imperiosus army marching through the mountain pass. Zagil raised his free hand and spread his fingers. The portal's view zoomed in on the head of the army. There, mounted atop a skeletal steed, was Sargal. He rode alongside Segrid. Sargal? The matriarch thought. She had to stop herself from audibly gasping. She watched as the spellweaver pointed his staff toward the ground ahead of the army. A moment later, the hidden teleportation trap flashed and died. Then he looked up at the portal and launched a fireball directly at it. The portal snapped shut before impact, and there was a collective groan in the room.
Sargal has betrayed us,
Zagil growled.
He is disabling the traps as he leads Imperiosus here.
The room was quiet for some time. The matriarch's mind raced with the shock of the revelation. Sargal had been openly critical of her rule, sure, but to go as far as betray the house? Even worse, to align with Imperiosus? The matriarch closed her eyes and let out a long breath. You are the matriarch of House Perpetuum, she told herself. Get it together. Osgaroth, have the conjurers engage. Osgaroth nodded and explained.
They already are, Matriarch. But Sargal is countering them. They tried to catch the army in a landslide, but he teleported it away. The Goliaths and Gargoyles are engaging, but they're barely making a dent.
Solmar raised a hand and asked,
What about mercenaries? Could we send out a request for aid? They've proved capable of turning battles in the past. We could even teleport them in.
Tolmach shook his head.
It's unlikely any would respond. The Mercenary League is still recovering from the last mercenary war. Their whole leadership chain is in chaos.
We don't need help from any filthy mercenaries anyway. We are House Perpetuum,
declared Ugroth, his arms crossed. We don't have the capability to face so many on our own, said Ulvan. Alone we face annihilation. Enough, the matriarch demanded, and her voice sent a flicker through the blue flames hovering above. What about House Nevaeus? Began Ulvan. While they have agreed to assist us in matters of war, they were exceptionally vague on how much they would assist us. The matriarch rubbed her brow. Ulvan, Renaud, go to Nevaeus and call in the favor Pyrite afforded us. If they won't grant us martial assistance, at least ensure they will house our people. Ulvan and Renaud bowed their heads, but Ugroth shot up.
You can't be serious! Matriarch! You would have us run?
She held his gaze. I would have you live. I would have you not die here. I would have House Perpetuum survive extinction. His furious glare gave way to a sadness so deep that she felt her heart ache in her chest.
But, Matriarch, we are House Perpetuum. We can't have fallen so far as to become refugees. Let us fight. If we are truly destined to end here, let us burn our memory into the hearts of all those who would see us fall, that we may be remembered for eternity.
She looked from Ugroth to the other members of the council. I would like to know where you all stand. All those in favor of retreating from Perpetuum Keep, raise your hands. Ulvan, Azul, and Solmar raised their hands. And those in favor of fighting? Ugroth raised his hand proudly. He was joined by Osgaroth, Bolgan, Renaud, and Tolmach. And, at the far end of the table, his eyes glowing with ancient fury, Zagil held up his hand. You too, Zagil?
I mean no disrespect, Matriarch, but I lived through the fall. Back then, we gave up too easily. The fall of the Hellbeast proved too much for the spellweavers of the day, and they decided to run. And we've been paying the price for that decision ever since. This one keep is all we have left. If it were up to me, I would never stop fighting for it.
Then She hesitated, the weight of Perpetuum's future hinging on her next words. We will
I said, if it were up to me.
Zagil interrupted.
But it isn't up to me. It is up to you. What is your will, Matriarch of House Perpetuum?
All eyes turned to her. Our house is more than this one keep, Zagil. It is all of us. Each one of you around this table, and all those who remember our legacy. We cannot fall here, for we are eternal. She met each gaze, but held Zagil's the longest. I will summon the Hell Beast. Prepare to stall the enemy for as long as you can. But in case I am unable to do it, we will evacuate the house to Nevaeus. That House Perpetuum may live on, and have the chance to reclaim what has been lost. That is my will. See it done. I'll handle this damned traitor,
the matriarch told Pyrite and cut the connection, unable to spare the focus. Lightning erupted from Sargal's staff. 14 bolts of furious electricity danced through the air, painting the patio in purple and blue as they raced toward the matriarch. She was on her knees, scrawling one of the possible sets of runes onto the stone of the patio. She didn't even glance up as the jagged bolts closed in. The double appeared in front of her and swept a hand through the air. A wide barrier blinked to life. 13 of the bolts thundered into the barrier, expelling their energy into it before vanishing. The last bolt redirected just before hitting the barrier and arced over it. A moment before it hit the matriarch, a portal opened and swallowed it. The double closed her hand and glared across the patio at the traitor. Between them, the air still vibrated with the residual energy from the chaotic lightning.
Not even a glance?
Sargal asked, looking past the double.
I know you can't finish it. The Hellbeast has always been your greatest folly.
He took aim with his staff, and 50 fireballs appeared in the air before him, spiraling upon themselves before shooting across the patio. A portal opened, catching them and reversing them back at Sargal. He teleported to the side and watched as they exploded against the domed barrier behind him. The explosion sent a ripple through the barrier, but it held strong.
I'm surprised you even bothered to come,
the double said. Sargal smiled.
Oh, my dear matriarch, I wouldn't miss this for the world. At long last, Perpetuum will be free of your foolishness.
He tapped his staff against the patio's stone floor, and a small blast of green flame billowed out, an attempt to destroy the summoning circle beneath him. But as the fire burned out, the chalk-drawn runes remained unharmed.
Protecting it with abjuration,
he muttered. The double reached a hand back toward her true body and swept over it. Stone, glowing with lines of magical power, emerged from the patio floor and covered her and the space she worked in.
You call handing Perpetuum to Segrid? Freeing it? What has happened to you, Sargal? I knew you disagreed with me. But to betray our home? This is a new low for you,
she declared, fixing him with a look of confusion. Sargal's lip twitched in the beginning of a snarl.
I wouldn't expect you to understand.
He swept his staff through the air, and black flame shot out. The entire patio erupted into a spiraling inferno. It reached up and lapped at the barrier, still holding back the blizzard outside, making it flash with displeasure. The double watched the black fire smash against the fresh barrier surrounding her like a sphere.
Infernal Tempest,
she noted.
So he's going for a battle of attrition right away.
She could feel her mana draining as the spell raged against her defensive magic, but the bleed was slow enough that she would most certainly win if she simply waited for him to exhaust himself. Behind her, her true body was safe, completely enclosed within the shell made from her bulwark of eternity. Nothing could get through that stone, not while she still had mana. She narrowed her eyes on Sargal. With the storm still raging, Sargal leveled his staff toward her, and it flared, glowing bright red against the black tempest. Then, it fired. A wall of molten rock shot toward her. It shattered through the barrier, and she only just managed to teleport out of the way before it took her head off. Without the barrier, the infernal flames started to burn her instantly. She snapped her fingers and cried,
Realign!
The flames flashed to snow that fell gently down to the patio floor. Sargal looked surprised for a moment, but quickly composed himself.
You didn't think I was going to let you hide behind your barriers this whole time, did you? Oh no, Matriarch. Here, today, we will finally find out which one of us truly deserves Lordship of Perpetuum. And it won't do for you to simply hide behind your shields.
The double brushed an ember from her shoulder and lifted off the ground.
I figured that's what this was about. And to think,
She summoned a great monolith of stone in the air above her.
you were considered the most devoted in your love for the house.
She raised a hand and it shattered into hundreds of jagged pieces. She swung down, and the shards accelerated toward Sargal. He began his teleport, but the spell failed. His eyes went wide, and he conjured a wall of stone around himself that absorbed the shards and hid him from view. Arcs of lightning tore out from behind the stone wall and bore down on the double. She put up small barriers to meet each one, but they redirected around them, like hooks reaching around a shield. They slammed into the double and sent horrendous shocks through her. She fell to the ground, smoking and twitching with the residual shocks. The matriarch let out a sigh from where she worked on the final part of the circle.
So he can control their path.
She reached out a hand and gripped the air. As if holding a disc that wasn't there, she rotated it to the left.
Reverse.
She watched through her split consciousness as the double rose back into the air and the lightning retreated from her, back to the point where they had redirected around her barriers. She moved the barriers into the intended path of the bolts and let time resume. The lightning crashed into the barriers with cracks of thunder. The stone around Sargal crumbled away as he looked up at the double.
My loyalty to Perpetuum has never faltered,
He exclaimed. His eyes blazed with fury, yet were dull and lightless at the same time.
but I cannot simply watch as you let our house fall to ruin.
He genuinely believes that.
She thought and conjured a barrier as another flurry of blasts, green necromantic flames this time, shot toward her. They collided with the barrier and exploded out, sending licks of disintegrating fire around the edges. She dropped the shield and stretched out her arms.
Look around you, Sargal. Osgarath dead. Zagil dead. Our soldiers all dead. The remnants of our great house forced to become refugees.
She pointed to where Pyrite was fighting and seemingly losing against Segrid's honor guard.
You brought Imperiosus to our doorstep. This is all that you have wrought.
She noticed Sargal flinch, and his eyes began to glow brighter. She could swear she saw confusion on his face as he stood there, seemingly stunned. She didn't wait. She poured mana into her staff, and it flared with power. The snow lying on the surface of the patio turned first to water, then to ice around the traitor's feet, holding him in place. Hundreds of diamond spikes began to materialize in the air around them, forming a hemisphere of glittering death, all aimed at the fallen spellweaver. But Sargal didn't react. He simply stared in a look of abject bewilderment.
What? Zara. I would never.
The double poured more power into her staff, and the spikes began to grow larger until each one was the size of a spear. She wove in another spell, matter acceleration, and the spears of diamond began to spiral and shake with potential energy, held in place only by the matriarch's telekinetic grip. She glared down at Sargal and whispered,
Now face the consequences.
She released the grip, and the spears ripped through the air, giving a thunderous crack as they broke through the sonic barrier. Sargal's eyes dimmed and grew focused once more. He took aim with his staff, and the air before him ruptured as the force of a volcanic eruption met the oncoming gemstones. It swallowed them, absorbing them into its molten mass, and carried on toward the double. She snapped her fingers, and the lava flashed to solid obsidian. She reached out and telekinetically took hold of the glassy stone beam. Grunting with effort, she reversed its flight back at Sargal. Green fire poured out from Sargal's staff and turned the oncoming rock to dust. Another wave of diamond spears, already formed, shot toward the traitor. They were followed by another wave, and then another, forming an endless sheet of lustrous rain.
You betrayed us for power.
Declared the double.
Then you can die by mine.
Sargal met each of the hundreds of projectiles with a blast of disintegrating fire. The green light turned the patio a sickly hue, refracting against the onrushing waves of diamonds, casting out their own dazzling flashes as they were hit. The double continued the onslaught, sending wave upon wave at Sargal, but he was meeting each one with a spell of his own.
More,
she thought. She glanced over at one of the nearby mountains.
If I can't out-conjure him, then this will have to do.
She disabled the anti-teleportation field and stretched out her hand toward the neighboring peak. A massive portal opened within it, decapitating the proud mountain. Millions of pounds of rock fell into the portal. The double opened her hand toward the barrier-covered sky, and another rift in reality opened above their heads. Sargal's eyes widened as he looked up at the rock crashing down toward him like a meteorite. He spun his staff through the air and let forth a blast of light so bright it blinded the double and sent her flying back. It washed over the patio and the falling mountaintop, covering everything in its brilliance. The double, enwrapped in a fresh protective barrier, opened her eyes and realized what this was. It was the light of the sun being released from a portal in front of Sargal. The blistering radiation cooked the very air. It evaporated the peak, destroyed the double's portal, and smashed against the barrier above them, making it shriek as the energy overload threatened to shatter the magical bonds. Shouting with agonizing effort, Sargal turned the portal on the Matriarch's true form, still hidden beneath her defensive shell. The double appeared in the way of the blazing star, arms spread as a massive glowing barrier appeared. She overlaid it with another and another as the vicious rays tore into them. Her feet skid across the patio floor as the solar winds roared against her until, at last, she collided with the stone that covered her true form. She could feel her barriers collapsing, one by one. She needed to recast the anti-teleportation field, needed to close Sargal's portal, but the slightest shift in her already split focus would mean death. She watched as the star's brilliance slammed into her final barrier. Sargal's portal collapsed, and the traitor fell to one knee. He was smoking, parts of his robes smoldering from the oppressive heat. He gasped for breath. Apparently, that technique was as damaging for him as it was for her, if not more so. The double dropped her barrier and forced herself back up. She was about to cast another spell when she heard an ear-splitting cry, one that filled her with such dread she could feel her heart lurch in her chest. It was the furious scream of Pyrite. She launched herself back into the air over the grove. There, she saw the axe raised above her pinned son. The sun, about to cast a self-destruct spell.
Pyrite, hold your breath!
She cried. With her hand raised toward the glowing barrier above them, she disabled it, and thousands of pounds of snow fell onto their heads.
It was foolish of you to get distracted, Matriarch,
hissed Sargal in her ear. Before she could react, she felt his hand touch the back of her neck, and an overwhelming feeling of pain burned within her, and both the double and her true self screamed. Pyrite liked snow. He always had. He liked the frigid beauty of it. It also made his armor less tiring, and there was little he found more amusing than watching an unprepared opponent slip on it in the midst of a fight. And, though he would not easily admit it, it reminded him of home. Being buried alive in it, though, he found he liked far less. Pyrite emerged from the snow, gasping. Violent wind buffeted against his helmet, sending a whistle through the slots. His blinding anger had cooled, and now he just felt tired. He looked around and found that the serene grove was completely covered. The Matriarch was gone, and Pyrite could hear the rumblings of magical combat thundering from atop the patio. The honor guard, too, were nowhere to be seen, likely still buried beneath the snow. Pyrite hoped that they would suffocate, but he had a feeling he wasn't that lucky. Suddenly, Segrid pushed out from the snow, his eyes wide with rage. Pyrite saw his chance and took it. He placed his hands in the snow around him and suffused it with magic. it hardened into ice, and Pyrite used its solidity to pull himself out. His boots refashioned themselves into wide snowshoes, and he stepped onto the compacted surface with a crunch. His winged spear manifested in his hand. He aimed for the struggling lord and threw, nearly falling over as the snow beneath the ice partially collapsed under his weight. The spear whistled through the air, but arced wide as a gust of wind roared through the grove. The spear slammed into the brick of the tower beyond, pulverizing stone as it came to a crashing halt. "Damn it!" Pyrite cursed, for a moment wondering if the lord had some old god watching over him. He dismissed the thought and took a deep breath, blowing out a cloud of steam. Fuck it. Manifesting a new glaive, he forced his tired body forward and took off across the snow. Segrid saw him coming and struggled to get his sword free of the drift. Before Pyrite could reach the lord, a hand reached out from the snow and grabbed his boot by its flared edge. He fell forward, arms slamming into the cold crystals. Looking back, he saw first the emerging black horns and then the helmeted head of the second honor guard. His uncovered face was beet red from the cold. He tried to pull Pyrite toward him, but he had little leverage as the snow continued to collapse around him. Pyrite sent a kick into the guard's exposed face and wrenched the boot free before continuing on toward Segrid. As he reached him, the lord got his sword free and raised it to block the descending strike. The glaive bit into the blade, but Segrid held his guard. He was strong, perhaps not as much as the honor guard, but still strong enough. Pyrite held the bind and leaned over the lord, reveling in his misfortune. For a moment, he thought he detected the faintest note of magic being cast. Did he have something other than the empowering artifact? Pyrite narrowed his eyes. "What's wrong, lord? Could it be?" he scoffed. "Could it be that Segrid Imperiosus is nothing but a weak old demon without his minions?" Pyrite's helmet demanifested, and he fixed the lord with a contemptuous glare. Pathetic. Then, Pyrite heard the whistling axe coming in from behind, and his helmet reappeared. He broke from the bind and dove out of the way, looking to see Akadoth pulling his strike before it slammed down into Segrid. He had reveled too long. He jumped back, narrowly dodging Akadoth's follow-up swing. The larger demon tried to give chase, but he staggered as his feet sank deeper into the snow. Pyrite, on the other hand, had little issue and walked along the top layer of snow, glaive resting on his shoulder. He would take this opportunity to catch his breath while he could. He knew he couldn't match the endurance of the honor guard, and he was sure Segrid was hiding something. Make him angry, he thought. You really shouldn't have come here, Segrid. He circled them, glancing over to see the second honor guard trying to pull himself free of his freezing binds. You have no heir, right? And you killed all those capable enough to threaten your rule. So tell me, when you die here, and trust me, you will, what happens to your precious house? Akadoth pulled the lord free from his burial, and Segrid fixed Pyrite with a glare.
Be silent, dog!
Segrid was practically boiling with fury, and Pyrite wondered if that was how he had just looked when he lost himself to his own anger. Make him show his hand. Strike a nerve, did I? Oh no, what will I do? He waved his left hand before him in a dramatic display of mock despair. For I have angered the great and terrible Lord Segrid of House Imperiosus. Then he broke down and laughed. Look at you, overcome by mere snow. What? Did you not plan for a bit of snow in the mountains? You think you're powerful with your little toy soldiers. Where are they now? Trapped behind rubble? True power is that which we hold, the power to rewrite the very rules of this world. And then there's you. Ugh, honestly. How truly pathetic.
Enough!
The Lord's eyes fumed with dark energy as he glared at Pyrite.
Your arrogance has gone on long enough, Pyrite of Perpetuum. Truly, you are a scion of this accursed house. You think yourself above the rest of demonkind, don't you? You think you are the only ones capable of such feats. Even when that was the case, House Imperiosus bested you, crushed your grip on power, and cast you back to the holes you crawled out of. And now...
Segrid held out a hand, and an object appeared from nowhere. It popped into existence where nothing but cold air had been a moment before. It was a tome, and Pyrite recognized it as the 30th and final Chronicle of Eternity.
We too share in that cataclysmic power.
Pyrite's contemptuous smile faded, and he dropped back into guard. There it is, he muttered, as he jumped back a few paces. Matriarch, how strong is the barrier you cast on me? There was no reply. Guess I'm gonna find out. Segrid drove his sword into the snow at his feet and grabbed the grand tome, holding it open before himself. The area began to glow, and snow began to melt as magic sparked into existence. Pyrite grabbed onto one of the branches of the great fir tree as the snow receded beneath his feet. Once it was gone, he dropped to the dirt and squeezed his glaive a little harder as he recognized the condensing plasma of Osgaroth's penultimate spell. Pyrite's eyes glanced to the other honor guard, who was back on his feet and was trying to move into Pyrite's blind spot. Then his gaze darted up high, and he smiled as a plan formed in his mind. Looking back at Segrid, he saw that the Lord was still charging up the spell. No doubt the tome was doing all the work. The demon Segrid was many things. A powerful lord at the head of one of the strongest military houses? Yes. A complete bastard. Pyrite was certain of it. But he was not a caster. Pyrite threw his arms out, as though welcoming the strike in.
Well, come on then, Segrid, he demanded. Show me that stolen power of yours. Show me just how strong we are.
A growl escaped Segrid's lips as he extended an open hand at the arrogant demon before him. The plasma sparked and jolted as it reached critical mass and shot forth, passing Akadoth and spiraling toward Pyrite. Pyrite saw it coming and smiled. He stepped to the side and watched as it slid by. Branches of curling blue lightning quested out and touched his armor, but did little more than send a prickle through him. Just as he presumed, the tome could cast the spells, but they were pale imitations of the true things. Without the mana of a true caster, they would never compare. The plasma ball flew across the grove and exploded against the stairs beyond. Pyrite turned back toward the invaders, silhouetted against the blazing blue light. It's not so easy, is it, Lord Pretender? He asked with a slight cock of his head. Despite his haughty tone, however, his heart was pounding as he knew that had the Lord aimed for the ground where he stood, rather than his actual body, he likely wouldn't have survived the explosion. But he couldn't let Segrid know that. He needed him angry. He needed him blind and focused solely on him. Segrid's lip curled in a snarl, and he shouted to his guard,
Kill him! Rip that arrogant tongue from his head and replace it with the steel of the blade!
Akadoth and the second honor guard closed in on him, and Segrid glared across the grove at him.
I will mount your head on a spike for all to see what happens to those who cross me!
Pyrite took a few more steps back and found the fountain behind him. The honor guard charged, axes raised, Akadoth from the front and the other from the side. And Pyrite smiled once more.
Gargoyles!
Beady red eyes looked down from atop the pillars ringing the room. Kill the intruders! Gray leathery wings beat as 20 gargoyles slammed into the onrushing honor guard. Akadoth held 3 back with the haft of his axe before 2 more slammed into him from behind. The second honor guard howled with pain and fury as one raked its claws across his exposed face before dragging him to the ground. 2 of you, Pyrite announced, with me. The rest of you, tear them apart. 2 of the gargoyles peeled away from the embattled honor guard and landed beside Pyrite, letting out screeches of fury. Pyrite aimed his glaive at Segrid across the grove. You don't get to hide behind your slaves anymore, Lord! Segrid caught a charging gargoyle by the neck. It grasped and clawed at his hand, wings beating hard as it tried to free itself. Segrid crushed its throat and dropped it. Grabbing his sword, he tore it from the brick and glared back at Pyrite.
Fine,
he growled.
I'll kill you myself.
Pyrite took off, his heavy footfalls drowned out by the cacophony of screeching gargoyles. Segrid raised the Perpetuum tome, and it glowed with arcane light. Lightning began to spark from Segrid's sword, and he sliced through the air, sending a wave of electrical energy flying toward Pyrite. The gargoyle on Pyrite's left dove into the wave, and it absorbed into the creature's magic-resistant skin, leaving a glowing gash upon its surface. The gargoyle landed unsteadily on its feet, and Pyrite ran past it. Segrid charged another spell, and Pyrite felt the air around him boil. He kicked out with his legs and slid forward. In the next instant, the air above ignited, orange flames licking at his horns. Using his glaive's spiked end as leverage against the brick floor, he sprang up, nearly within striking distance of the Lord. Segrid scowled, and the book vanished, disappearing from his grip. Pyrite lunged in, glaive sweeping in a flat arc. Segrid met the blow, blade to blade. Pyrite, too close to use the back end of the long weapon, shoved Segrid's sword up, and the gargoyle dove in. It rammed its horned head into Segrid's armored torso. Segrid grunted and slammed his pommel into the back of the beast's head with a blow that sent out a shower of stone chips. The gargoyle fell to the ground, dead. Pyrite thrust his glaive forward, aiming for Segrid's neck. Most of the demon lord was covered in exquisite armor, a mix of gold and silver, with the sigil of his house emblazoned across his chest. The only parts uncovered were his head and neck. Pyrite felt an abject feeling of disappointment. He never did understand why lords refused to wear helmets. Segrid dodged to the side, and the glaive slid through empty air. The lord pulled back his arm to counterattack, but Pyrite saw it coming and slammed the haft of his glaive into the lord's face. He felt Segrid's nose crunch under the blow, and he staggered back. Pyrite followed, glaive swinging down from above. Segrid raised his sword to meet the strike, but he was stunned, still processing the pain in his smashed nose. Pyrite was loving this, and he met the demon's gaze. Ah, that one looked painful. Not gonna help in the air-making department, that's for sure. Segrid shoved Pyrite off and slashed at him. Pyrite caught the blow on his weapon. He grabbed the lord by the wrist, but a kick slammed into his abdomen and shoved him back. The blow had hit square in his lower ribs, knocking the air out of him. It was then that he noticed the artifact around Segrid's neck was glowing, emanating arcane energy that swirled about the lord. Cheating bastard, Pyrite swore, and decided he should probably stop goading the lord and focus on killing him. Segrid came at him, faster than before. His blade thrust in, and Pyrite smacked it aside, but it was followed by another, and then another. The sharp tip of the sword smacked into the lamelier of Pyrite's chest and shoulder. As another blow came in, Pyrite tried to parry, but watched as the blade stopped mid-swing and redirected to the opposite angle before smacking him in the side of the helmet. His ears were left ringing as Segrid lunged in, throwing another strike that slammed against his pauldron. His armor was holding, but each blow was leaving a bruise that made it harder and harder to move. Pyrite leapt back. He was at a disadvantage so close, the length of his glaive hard to maneuver. Segrid summoned the tome and charged a spell. A blast of wind slammed into Pyrite, taking him off his feet and throwing him across the grove. He crashed into the fountain and felt it crack against his back. He tried to draw in breath, but found he couldn't. He couldn't breathe. Panic gripped him, and he clawed at his visor. Mustering enough focus, he managed to demanifest his helmet and gasped for air. For a moment, Pyrite wondered if he had gone too far with his goading, but as he regained control of his lungs, he decided he had not. Segrid approached, tome raised as it began to glow once more. Pyrite forced himself up, leaning heavily on his glaive. He was hurt. He could feel the hot wetness of blood on his back. The impact must have torn open his skin beneath the armor. Combined with all the rest of his wounds, it was growing hard to move. Pyrite watched as a large spike of ice formed before the lord. He's really just trying all the spells, isn't he? Pyrite wondered. The spike shot toward him at blistering speed. Pyrite poured his dwindling mana into his vambrace. It grew larger, taking on the circular form of Daran's shield. The spike slammed into it, penetrating it before stopping against Pyrite's chestplate. Pyrite breathed a sigh of relief, and, as the shard of ice disappeared, he saw Segrid charging him once more. The lord's sword came from the side, and Pyrite threw the shield in the way. The blade let out a loud clang as it bounced off the metal rim. Segrid grabbed the shield with his offhand and pulled it to the side. He was too close again. Pyrite considered his options and decided. He let his glaive fall to the floor. Segrid drove his sword toward Pyrite's exposed head. Pyrite caught the blow on the vambrace of his free arm. tore his shield loose of Segrid's grip, and plunged it, edge first, into the face of the Lord. Segrid recoiled, howling with rage. He stabbed wildly with his sword. Pyrite caught the blade through the hole in his shield and wrenched it. For the barest moment, the image of Pyrite's teacher appeared in his mind, the master he had watched Segrid murder. The metal groaned and snapped, the majority of the now broken blade clanging to the ground. Pyrite grabbed Segrid by the gorget and raised his shield for another blow, declaring, "That was for Daran!" He slammed the shield into the Lord's bloodied face again. "That's for a need!" For a moment, it looked as if Segrid might pass out, but Pyrite backhanded him, and the Lord's eyes snapped open. Pyrite reached down and picked up the broken tip of Segrid's sword, the same sword that had beheaded his master all those years ago. He raised it high and shouted, "And this is for Iramed!" But before he could bring it down, he saw, out of the corner of his eye, that the gargoyles were all but dead. His rage turned to horror as Akaroth cleaved through 4 of them, his axe's blade burning orange as it seared through gray flesh. The moment of distraction was all the Lord needed, as Segrid leaned forward and spat blood into Pyrite's wide eyes, blinding him. The Lord ripped from Pyrite's grasp and tackled him into and through the fountain. The stones shattered beneath the crashing demons, dousing them in freezing water. The broken blade was knocked free from Pyrite, and it clattered to the wet stone. Pyrite looked up through burning eyes to see Segrid raising the lower part of his sword, the jagged tip of its broken blade pointing toward Pyrite's unprotected face. He slammed it down, and Pyrite caught his arms, the blade only a hand's width from his cheek. The Lord reared back and slammed down again, pushing it past Pyrite's block. Pyrite thrust his head to the side, barely dodging death. He reached up, grasping toward Segrid's neck. Segrid shot back, out of Pyrite's reach. But Pyrite smiled anyway, because in his grip was the artifact. Segrid looked from the artifact to Pyrite, shock clear on his bloodied features. Pyrite put a boot against Segrid's chestplate and heaved, shoving the Lord off and ripping the artifact from his neck. Pyrite grabbed his glaive and forced himself back to his feet. As he did, Akaroth's axe slammed into his chest. The barrier around him collapsed as it took the brunt of the force. Pyrite felt the plates bend in as the impact crushed through them. He was sent flying back, where he hit hard brick and skidded to a stop against the steps to the patio. The second honor guard raised his axe over the last of the gargoyles, and the beast let out one last defiant screech as the axe came down. Akaroth pulled Segrid to his feet, and all 3 of them turned toward Pyrite. Pyrite looked up at the tumultuous sky, the snow spiraling down around them. He fought to keep himself awake as darkness closed like talons around his vision. Then, high above, flitted a banner, torn from its post and now floating in the maelstrom that surrounded them, the hourglass rotating as it tried desperately to stay aloft. It reminded Pyrite of the Perpetuum Guard, and how they had fought to the bitter end, never surrendering. He thought of Osgaroth and Zagio, and how they had sacrificed their lives, never doubting the Perpetuum would endure. And he thought of Anid and Daran, and how they had given their lives for him. They had trusted him, and now they were gone. Perpetuum, he thought. His house. It had been so long since he had held anything but contempt for it. It was under that banner he was born. In these halls he was raised.
Protect the Matriarch.
Oz's words echoed through his mind once more. The fire of perpetuity burned within him. He grabbed hold of it and used it to turn the last of his mana into a new glaive and drove it into the brick beside him.
We stand eternal,
he growled and willed himself to stand. His entire life he had watched the slow and agonizing fall of their once great dynasty, decaying little by little. No more, he whispered, his eyes ablaze with furious determination.
Perpetuum shall fall no further.
The honor guard walked toward him, leaving Segrid standing in front of the destroyed fountain. Pyrite nearly fell over as he got to his feet, his body screaming for him to give in, to stop. Blood dripped from unseen wounds beneath armor that felt much heavier than before, and his eyes threatened to close at any moment. but a telepathic message made him smile instead. He fixed Segrid with a glare and shouted to ensure he was heard. I was wrong to call you weak, Segrid. Segrid summoned the Chronicle of Eternity, and it began to glow with power. I have no doubt that against you, on my own, I would lose. But you see, I don't actually have to beat you to win. Segrid perked up as the realization dawned on him. The ground began to shake. I just had to stall. Brilliant purple light erupted from atop the patio, followed by a far-off roar. "300 years prior."
Spellweaver Xaramaliss took her seat at the council table between Sargal and Osgaroth. She still felt uncomfortable sitting amongst such powerful and experienced casters. For one as young as her to be inducted into the Spellweaver Council was unheard of, and yet here she was. The 198-year-old demon felt small amongst the much older demons. Ulvan was the next youngest, but even she was still 112 years older. Zara tried her best to look confident, but was pretty sure she wasn't doing a good job. She had only been on the council for a few months, but the feeling that she had them all tricked had yet to go away. Sargal suddenly patted her on the back, and it took all she had not to yelp.
Relax, Sarah,
he said with a warm smile.
It's just tradition. We all have to do it.
On Zara's other side, Osgaroth chuckled quietly. She sighed and looked down at her journal. In it were her notes on the direction she would take the house, should she be elected as matriarch. The previous patriarch, Akaz Perpetuum, had died in the most recent Imperiosus incursion, and the time had come for the Spellweavers to select a new leader. She looked at Sargal with eyes full of exasperation.
That's easy for you to say,
she whispered.
as if it isn't already clear who's going to be chosen.
Sargal smiled and looked away. He was the obvious choice. While younger than some of the oldest council members, he was well experienced in both magic and administration. And where Patriarch Akaz had been inwardly focused, leading to an era of house stagnancy, Sargal had long been an advocate for a more aggressive position against their hostile neighbor. But most important of all, Sargal was one of the select few casters in Perpetuum, let alone Terra Picatus as a whole, with command of 4 schools of magic. The door to the council's meeting room opened, and the room fell quiet. Zigil entered, looking more tired than usual. His gnarled wood staff clacked against the stone floor as he walked. He slumped into his chair, leaving his staff leaning against the table's edge. He cleared his throat and declared,
"You all know why we're here. So let us begin. Sargal, let's start with you."
Sargal bowed his head to the ancient spellweaver and stood.
Let me start by saying that I wish the Patriarch a peaceful rest in the eternal crypts. So too do I wish his end could have been more peaceful. But to give one's life in defense of our great house, who could ask for a better way to go?
He let out a sigh and looked at the banner that hung on the wall behind the empty chair at the head of the long table.
Now, it's no secret that I believe we should take the fight to our enemies, and I still stand by that. We are not House Umbra, or Nokens who play only in the shadows and cover of night. We are not Prevectus with their laughable mechanical toys. We are not Daito, who cares only for coin. And we are most certainly not Imperiosus, with their lust for war. But that doesn't mean we are incapable of doing as they do. The only way for House Perpetuum to reclaim what was lost in the fall is for us to raise our armies and take back what is ours.
His eyes burned with fervor.
For too long, we have wasted away, letting Imperiosus invade what we have left, over and over again, without reprisal.
He raised a clenched fist before him.
If I am chosen to be the next Patriarch, I promise you, I will lead us out of this dark age and reclaim what is ours.
The room fell silent as he said his last word, and they sat with that for a while. Finally, Ulvan spoke up. And how exactly do you suggest we do that? Even if we were to conscript every able body from the valleys, we would only have a fraction of what Imperiosus has at its disposal. And that's assuming Diablos wouldn't act against us. All eyes returned to Sargal, awaiting his rebuttal. He smiled, but Zara could see a bead of sweat forming on his brow.
All too right, Ulvan. All too right. I do have a solution. In fact, we have always had a solution, and I would be surprised if you yourself had never considered it. For you see, while we are limited in number now, it has not always been that way. The answer is beneath our feet.
Ulvan's eyes widened as the master of necromancy realized what he meant. She shot to her feet and exclaimed, "You can't be serious. You are speaking of our ancestors." Sargal seemed to have expected this response, and he met her glare.
They are. And they gave their lives so the Perpetuum would survive. Do you mean to say that they wouldn't gladly do it again if given the chance? Especially if it means we reclaim our stolen lands and rightful place?
Ulvan didn't respond, seemingly conflicted. Sargal carried on.
I would be first in line to give my life and unlife if it meant Perpetuum could thrive. There are 30,000 demons in our catacombs. With necromancy, they could be given a chance to exact righteous vengeance on those who betrayed us. Combine that with our casters and the thousands of summons we can put forth. Imperiosus, nay, the Demon King himself wouldn't stand a chance against us. Think of it, my friends. The return of House Perpetuum.
They were all quiet as they seriously considered the idea. Zara found it uncomfortable. The honoring of Perpetuum dead was sacred. But if it meant Perpetuum could return... No, she decided, goes against our oldest traditions.
Are you finished, Sargal?
Zagil asked, his tone neutral. Sargal bowed to those around him and said,
I am.
Zara didn't notice Sargal sit down beside her. She was still thinking about the flaws in his plan. Such an act would release their souls from the protection of the crypts, letting them be devoured by Heus.
Zara?
Called Zagil. Hearing her name shocked her out of her thoughts. Yes? Zagil motioned for her to rise.
It's your turn.
Her face grew pale and she felt dizzy as she stood. All eyes turned to her, waiting for her to speak. She glanced down at her journal. She could feel herself shaking.
Zara, relax. You are here because you have proven yourself worthy. You can do it,
said Sargal telepathically. She looked down towards him, and he gave her a supportive thumbs up. She took a deep breath and said, Our role is greater than just the reclamation of lost territory. While I share the wish that we could undo the damage of the fall, reclaim what was lost, damning our honored dead to be consumed by Heus, whether they would be willing or not, is not the correct choice. She saw Sargal's eyes widen slightly, but he didn't interrupt. We cannot forget that we have enemies greater and more dangerous than Imperiosus and Diablos. The gods will return. I don't know when. It could be a millennium from now, or tomorrow. But Perpetuum is and always has been the only house capable of stopping them. And to that end, I believe our primary goal should be the summoning of the Hellbeast. There were a few gasps and quiet muttering from the rest of the council, and Ugrath asked,
That knowledge has been lost for a millennium. How do you propose we perform a ritual we don't have access to?
No, she has a point,
said Osgaroth, before Zara could respond.
During my time studying with House Adjuro, I came across one of the Chronicles of Eternity, although I presumed it was a copy. In hindsight, I should have procured it anyway, but my point is they are out there.
That's all well and good, Osgaroth, but from our current position...
Silence!
Zagil snapped.
Zara, please continue.
Xara bowed her head to Zegil as both Ugrath and Osgarath fell silent. With the Hellbeast's power, we would be able to tip the scales in our favor against Imperiosus, allowing us to have a great advantage in reclaiming what is ours. And simultaneously, it would ensure we are ready to face the gods when they return.
But that is still assuming we can even find the tomes,
sighed Solmar. Xara met his gaze. We are House Perpetuum, she declared. We are the ones who created our own magic. We are the ones who threw off the shackles of the gods. We are the ones closest in strength to the gods. And when the time comes, we will be the ones to stand against them again. While the rest of the houses are distracted, fighting their pointless wars, we will take back the tomes and resummon our legacy. The rest of the council stared at her, eyes wide and burning with a mix of emotions. Suddenly she realized how forward she had been, and felt like shrinking herself to the size of a dust mite, so she could hide in the cracks of her wooden chair. Zegil, who before had seemed exhausted, smiled and asked,
Are you finished then, Xaramaliss?
Xara quickly bowed to the council and took her seat, refusing to look any of them in the eye. Yes, I'm finished.
Then, Osgarath, it is your turn.
The rest of the council went, one by one, giving their speeches and rebutting any counter-argument. When the floor was yielded to Zegil, he declared that he was not interested in the role, and forewent any speech. When he did this, Xara leaned over to Sargal and whispered,
I didn't realize we were allowed to do that.
Both he and Osgarath had laughed quietly at that. Then came the voting. What surprised Xara was that as they went around the table, asking for votes for the other members, none raised their hands. I guess they planned to vote for Sargal. While she respected the ideas raised by the others, only Sargal had given a tangible path forward for House Perpetuum, even if she didn't agree with the method.
Any who would vote for Sargal, raise your hand now,
said Zegil. Xara watched as hands went up around the table. Ugrath, Tomak, Azul, and of course Sargal raised their hands. Xara was about to raise her hand when she realized the remaining 6 still hadn't raised theirs. What are they doing? Who are they going to vote for if not? She stopped mid-thought as she realized there was only one spellweaver left to be voted for. She glanced at Sargal, who seemed to have realized the same thing, a look of surprise on his face. The hands that had been raised went down, and Zegil said,
Any who would vote for Xaramaliss, raise your hand now.
Xara's eyes went wide as Osgarath, Ulvan, Solmar, Volgan, and Renad raised their hands. And at the far end of the room, Zegil raised his hand as well. A hand tapped her on the back, and she turned to see Sargal looking at her, a look of regret mixed with pride in his eyes. His words appeared in her mind once more.
Aren't you going to vote?
She slowly raised her hand with the rest. She didn't even know why she did. She didn't want this role, not really. She had given the speech because she thought she had to. But with Sargal's encouragement, she raised it nonetheless.
Then it is decided. Xaramaliss, from this moment on, you are Matriarch, Xaramaliss Perpetuum.
She stood and stared at Zegil. Her words failed to form. Her heart pounded in her ears, and she felt as though she might pass out. She reached out a hand, and her staff appeared. She turned it sideways and felt the hourglass grind down. Already her mana flowed into it as she whispered the words, "Halt the sands of time." Time stood still as she slumped back into her chair. Her heart continued to pound, but all around her had stopped. Osgarath, sitting beside her, looked up toward where she had been standing, his face frozen. Ulvan, across the table, sat immobile, looking at Zegil. And Zegil was still standing, his arms still raised as if giving the proclamation. "Why?" she asked. She pulled her legs up onto the chair and held them close to her chest, She felt like the weight of the role now bestowed on her would crush her. How did this happen? She looked at Zegil and slowly, tentatively, reached a hand out toward him. Then she snapped her fingers, and he blinked. He looked around, confused, but when his eyes reached Xara, he whispered,
So it is true.
Why? Why would you choose me? Zegil glanced at the frozen world around them and smiled.
You ask me that. After this?
She glared at the old spellweaver. Sargal was the obvious choice. I can't do this. I'm not cut out to be matriarch. I still don't understand how I've even been allowed on the council in the first place. Zegil teleported beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder.
Come with me.
He teleported them both outside, and when she opened her eyes, she realized they were on a nearby summit. Before them, Perpetuum Keep stood proudly, silhouetted against the rainbow smear of the night sky.
Xara, sit with me.
Zegil said as he sat down on the cliff edge. Xara joined him, glancing at the dark chasm below.
I like to come here when I'm feeling uncertain. I find it helps to clear my mind.
He let out a deep sigh.
You know, I have seen the ascensions and deaths of one matriarch and two patriarchs. I have witnessed our house at the peak of its power, and now at its lowest. But through it all, I have never felt as uncertain about Perpetuum's future as I do now.
Xara stared at the ancient spellweaver. Zegil, she breathed.
I know Sargal's plan is a path out of this darkness. I know that he truly believes the ends justify the means. But, well, it's as you surmised. We would be damning those who entrusted us with the future to consumption by the gods.
Then why can't you be the patriarch? She asked. Zegil smiled.
For the same reason I cannot go along with Sargal's plan. It is not our way.
He reached out a hand, and a stone shot free from the cliffside, floating in the air before him. He twirled a finger about the rock, and it began to spin, casting off dust as it transmuted into another shape, the shape of a flower. Finally, as the last specks of dust fell into the chasm below, Zegil teleported the stone iris into Xara's lap.
Those are the only schools of magic I am capable of. Perpetuum shall always be led by those most skilled in magic, that we may ascend to the heights of the gods. It was never my place to rule.
She looked from the stone flower to Zegil. But why me?
Because unlike Sargal, who would tempt us toward darkness with promises of grandeur, you have given us what he couldn't. Hope.
But I've made no guarantees.
True. We might not succeed. But the Hellbeast is the best chance Perpetuum has, without lowering ourselves to base barbarism. You remembered the meaning of what it is to be House Perpetuum, where we had forgotten. You showed us a better path forward, so we will follow you, Matriarch.
Xara let out a deep sigh. What am I even doing? I should be honored, not trying to run from it. She fixed Zegil with a look of fierce determination. Okay, I'll do this, but you better prepare yourself. You are going to help me. Zegil croaked out a dry laugh.
So be it.
He stood up from the ledge and offered her a hand. As he pulled her up, he declared,
Don't worry, Matriarch. I will always be there to advise you.
Zegil, I could really use your help now.
The matriarch thought as she scrawled another of the possible historical answers to the riddle that was the Hellbeast ritual.
A great war erupted between master and slave. God versus demon.
She thought as she wrote.
Perpetuum was wrecked with devastation? No, that's not it.
Sweat fell from her chin as her mana melted away. The curse of manic decay, which Sargal had cast on her double, was rapidly burning through her mana.
I know you'd be scolding me for lowering my guard like that.
She thought. On any other caster, such a curse would quickly burn through all of their mana and then kill them. But Xaramaliss was no ordinary caster. Her mana was decaying, and at a nauseating rate, but she could hold out for a while. Her attempts to rewind time to before the curse had been laid hadn't worked, and now she was in a race against that which she had once thought she had control over. Time. She felt the magical stone that surrounded her tremble as another blast of disintegrating flame slammed against the outside.
For 300 years I waited for you to summon that damn creature!
Sargal exclaimed from outside.
And nothing. You've nothing to show for it.
Another blast of lava slammed against the rock around her, sending a shock through and shaking the drakebone chalk on the ground.
We could have reclaimed all that was lost, but you had us waste away while your brats searched for the tomes!
The Matriarch's double fell back against the outside of the sphere of rock covering her true form, her most recent barrier collapsing under the molten barrage. She pushed off the stone, back to her feet. She nearly fell over as the wind roared in from the blizzard surrounding them. She steadied herself on her staff and cast a fresh barrier, layering a thin film of her bulwark of eternity over the front of it. Sargal took aim with his staff and launched another blast of eruption. It slammed into the barrier and exploded out, sending searing hot rock raining out over the sides. He recast the spell, sending another torrent of glowing lava into the barrier, and then another, and then another. The double's feet slid across the stone until she found her back against the bulwark again. Sargal, still launching lava, raised a hand and innumerable miniature stars appeared amidst the snowstorm high above. He thrust his hand down, and the stars fell. The double cast a barrier in the form of a sphere as they rained down upon her. Shocks rang out like thunder as the mini stars exploded against the magical shield. The double fell to a knee as the barrier grew smaller and smaller. As each new star crashed into the surface, it left a small tear that she had to repair.
Ven? Any time now?
She demanded. Almost there, Matriarch, the golem replied. Another set of 3 disintegrating beams smashed into the barrier in front of the double, and at last, it collapsed. The barrier around her dissolved as a new set of falling stars shot down toward her. Location reached. The double aimed her staff at Sargal, only she wasn't aiming at him, but past him, at the small golem with ruby eyes on the other side of the patio.
Colossus!
She cried. The little stone golem that was Ven shook as his rocky surface began to grow. In an instant, he towered over the comparatively tiny Sargal. The patio shook beneath the trader's feet, breaking his concentration. The falling stars winked out of existence just before collision. Sargal turned toward the deafening roar of grinding stone and saw the raised arm of the colossal Ven. Ven slammed his arm down, shaking the mountain, but it hadn't hit the trader. An equally massive skeletal hand held Ven's arm mere inches away from Sargal. The rest of the bone giant finished manifesting as it shoved Ven back and stepped protectively over its summoner. Ven came to a slow stop, the edge of the patio just behind him.
Obstacle encountered,
Ven said, his voice far deeper now. He slammed his boulder-sized fists together, and magic sparked between them.
Eradicating obstacle.
Sargal aimed his staff toward Ven, but just as it started to glow, he felt the charge of mana from behind him. The double was already running for him, her staff sweeping through the air. A torrent of snow swept in from the blizzard and shot for the traitor. Just before impact, the snowflakes condensed, forming spikes of ice. The bone giant stepped in the way, the ice shattering against its massive leg. Ven swung his fist toward the bone giant, catching it on the side of the head. The impact shook the patio. The spell activated, and a secondary impact slammed into the bone giant. Gravitational waves reverberated from Ven's fist, and through the giant skeleton, sending it teetering toward the floor. Sargal's eyes went wide, and he conjured a stone cocoon around himself to block the falling giant. It crashed to the patio with a boom that echoed off the distant peaks. Fragments of the skeleton's skull fell away as it tried and failed to get back to its feet, before the baleful fire in its eyes winked out. The double, now hovering in the air above them, poured mana into her staff and watched as the raging snow condensed in the air, spinning together until at last it was a massive spike. She sent it flying down, aimed right for where Sargal was emerging from his stone cocoon. The double watched his lips part as his staff glowed green. A wave of emerald energy shot out from him, washing over the bone giant lying motionless around him. The summoned skeleton, its head repairing, reached up and shattered the falling ice into thousands of pieces. The double took hold of the shards, and they turned toward Sargal. Again they accelerated and shot toward the traitor, but a blast of black fire exploded out, absorbing the spikes and knocking the double back. Her barrier, only just raised in time, flashed angrily as the infernal tempest threw her to the ground. She crashed down as the tempest died. The bone giant caught another of Ven's blows. Its arm shattered as the gravitational waves rippled through it. But before the shards of bone reached the ground, another flash of green shot from Sargal, and they reversed their flight, reforming the giant's arm. The bone giant rose from where it had been lying and charged into Ven, the two of them slamming into each other with an impact that shook the patio again. Sargal smiled and turned back toward the double.
Such a shame, isn't it, Matriarch?
He sneered.
All that effort, and you've not managed to land a single blow.
The double heaved a deep sigh.
Can't match him in combat magic. Without evocation, I can't hope to match his casting speed.
She could still feel her mana decaying. She had about 64% left, but she needed at least half for the summoning. Her thoughts drifted to Pyrite.
How does he manage with so little mana?
But the thought gave her an idea. It was a gamble, but for a demon like Sargal, whose skill in evocation meant he never had to deal with a close-up attacker, it might just be enough to make him panic. She grabbed her staff, and the winds intensified. The wall of falling snow around them began to spiral. She rose back to her feet and spread her arms wide as if offering herself as a target. Sargal took aim, but before he could fire, she brought her arms and the storm in. The entire patio disappeared as snow blotted everything out. The double took off, and not a moment too soon, as a blast of molten rock shot through the space she had just been. Under the cover of the storm, she cast spells on herself, both conjuration to summon the stone and abjuration for added protection. Another blast of molten rock shot through the air behind her. Her footfalls grew weighted and loud. Finally, she released her staff. She wouldn't need it now. A blast of black fire exploded out from Sargal. It engulfed the snow and cleared the patio. But as the fire dissipated, he was shocked to see the stone-covered fist coming straight for his face, and the stone-armored matriarch it was attached to. He cast Disintegrating Beam, but the green fire merely bounced off the stone. He could do nothing, as for the first time in his life, a fist slammed into his face. Sargal recoiled, howling with a mix of pain and fury. He looked at the double, shocked.
Are you insane?
A second fist slammed into his stomach, and he doubled over, gagging. She wound up for another strike, but Sargal staggered back, sending multiple blasts of lightning streaking toward her. She raised a hand and a barrier blinked to life.
That's right.
She thought, as the lightning sent sparks showering over the top of her magical shield.
Don't wind up a punch.
She recalled the time she had watched Pyrite half play, half train with the Perpetuum guard. She kept the barrier raised and charged into Sargal again, smashing the barrier into him and driving him back off his feet. The self-strengthening spell she had cast was working remarkably well. Sargal crashed to the patio floor, his staff falling from his hand and clattering away. He was bleeding from a cut on his cheek, and his face twisted with rage. He reached out his hand to resummon his staff. The stone-clad double grabbed him by his embroidered Perpetuum robes, beautifully woven velvet, now stained with the blood that fell from his cheek. She lifted him and was about to punch him in the abdomen again, when a telepathic warning from Ven intruded on her mind. She looked to see the bone giant reaching for her. Ven tackled the enormous skeleton, and they both tumbled over the embattled casters, barely missing the demons. Sargal capitalized on the distraction and aimed an open palm at the stone-clad head of the double.
Disintegrate,
he said, and necromantic fire engulfed her. The slot she had been looking through closed, sealing her face away from the flames. The fire hissed violently against the magical reinforcement. The double reached forward with her free hand, and a new barrier appeared, catching the flames and sending them shooting over the edges. She expanded the barrier and inverted it, so rather than covering her, it curved toward Sargal. His own flame shot back toward him, the edges licking at his robes. He cut the spell and shouted,
"Fine. Aura of death."
The eye slots blocking the double's view opened just in time for her to see a dark cloud of green mist erupt from the spellweaver, enveloping them both. In an instant, her strength vanished, and she dropped the traitor before falling to her hands and knees. She could feel the spell trying to stop her heart.
No!
She cried within her mind, unable to even speak aloud. She forced herself back to her feet, and her heart lurched, barely able to take the strain. Her vision darkened, but she looked up to see the charging light of Sargal's staff, now back in his hand and aimed at her. The spear of light shot straight through the barrier, then the stone, then her. The impact sent her flying back, and she once again found herself up against the bulwark. Her true form winced from the shared pain. Ven came stomping in, putting himself between both matriarchs and the traitor. The bone giant stood, once again recovered from what should have been fight-ending damage. It stepped in front of Sargal, who watched from the other side of the patio.
I could rewind time. Is there even a point? It would just be a waste of mana,
thought the matriarch. She still had her trump card, but if she used it with so little mana to spare, she would have to ensure it would end the fight. The double still lay on the ground, glaring at Sargal. The effect of the spell was passing, but the clone was bleeding from the wound that went straight through her abdomen. Sargal had no doubt been aiming for her core, just in front of her spine, but the blow to his face must have affected his aim. She let the stone armor fall away as she forced herself back up to a knee.
Why?
She asked.
Why do this, Sargal? This will mean the death of House Perpetuum.
Sargal, still rubbing his jaw, looked at her and smiled.
Fool. I'm doing this for House Perpetuum.
The bone giant charged, and Ven answered. The two slammed into each other with a deafening crash, sending out bone and stone chips that clattered to the patio floor.
That doesn't make any sense. How does helping Segrid do anything for Perpetuum?
Sargal shook his head as the two summons battled between them. He glanced at her, and she felt his telepathic knock. He was asking her to open a link to him. She narrowed her eyes, but if he was willing to gloat, it would give her more time to figure out the last part of the ritual. Slowly, she opened a channel, being careful not to let him in too far.
Ah, much better. It is so loud out here,
he said.
How does this help Perpetuum?
She demanded, her tone short and cold.
I'm not surprised you can't see it, but I really should thank you. After all, without you doing exactly as I expected, my whole plan wouldn't have worked out so well.
The double's eyes widened, and the matriarch paused in her work.
What? Sargal, what are you talking about?
Sargal's smile deepened.
Oh yes, I knew you would evacuate the house, but I also knew that you wouldn't abandon it. And so I have everything I want right in front of me. Perpetuum is safe, and both you and Segrid are in the same place. So I thank you, Matriarch.
The bone giant slammed its head into Ven's, and the double watched as the two rubies that served as his eyes were knocked loose. They fell to the patio, their once shining surface darkened with cracks. Ven stumbled back, coming dangerously close to the edge. The double pushed back to her feet.
Segrid and I? Why would that?
She paused as the dots began to connect in her mind.
What is it that you want?
Sargal looked taken aback, and for a moment the double saw his eyes brighten before once again returning to their strangely dull state.
I want what I've always wanted. The return of Perpetuum to its rightful place. But you and the others refused to act, so I had to.
The bone giant sent a stone-shattering punch into the chest of Ven. The rocky surface cracked and fell away, exposing his glowing core. Sargal glanced over at the grove. Blue light and electrical sparks shot into the air where Segrid and his honor guard battled Pyrite.
Imperiosus has to be destroyed,
he continued.
And I gave us a solution. But no, they chose you because your pretty little speech touched their hearts. But that was when I realized there was another solution. One that would give us an army and deal with our enemy. Imperiosus is controlled by Segrid, so whoever controls Segrid controls the largest army in all of Terra Pecatus. But I knew you would never agree to it, so you will have to be removed.
You're using Segrid as a way to kill me? You're planning to kill him and enslave his entire house. Like the gods.
Brilliant, isn't it? Everything we have ever wanted.
He smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile he had once worn. It was a wicked smile, as though he was reveling in it all. As she came to realize the scope of his plan, she remembered the kind demon he had once been. It had been he who recommended her for the council. It had been he who supported her during the meeting those 300 years ago. He had always been willing to make hard decisions, but not once had he enjoyed it.
Zagil and Osgaroth are dead,
she said.
They died because of you, because of this plan of yours.
Sargal stared for a moment, his gaze impassive, his smile faded.
They got in the way.
The matriarch went cold.
Who are you? You wouldn't do this. You've never put your own desires ahead of the house.
I'm doing this for the house,
he shot back. She pushed him out and shut the connection.
No, you're not. If you were, you wouldn't have cared to ensure you could kill me. Sargal was never that petty, and he certainly wouldn't have gone through with a plan that would have harmed House Perpetuum like this. This is a plan that will devastate both Perpetuum and Imperiosus. This will cut the heads off of both Perpetuum and Imperiosus. No, this is something else. You're trying to gain an army, but it's not for Perpetuum. You are not Sargal.
She felt numb as the demon before her smiled that wicked smile. Sargal sighed.
You're a clever one, aren't you?
His eyes narrowed, their light now gone completely, but the smile remained, and his head cocked eerily to the side.
Then who am I, Matriarch of House Perpetuum?
Suddenly, a wave of overwhelming pressure emanated from him and nearly brought the double to her knees. It evoked a feeling deep within the matriarch, something primordial. A fear that felt so ingrained, and yet so foreign, it felt like it didn't belong to her. But within that fear was the answer she had been looking for. Monstrously powerful magical energy radiated out from the traitor as his smile deepened. The double steadied herself and manifested her staff.
Though I don't know which one you are, I know what you are. You are one of the gods.
Sargal lowered his staff toward her and let out a laugh. The unseen god controlling him spoke through him.
Correct. I knew you could do it. Oh, but be careful. You wouldn't want to use too much mana and not be able to summon your dear old pet. Would you?
The gem atop his staff glowed with arcane fury. But he was right. She only had 53% of her mana left. She couldn't afford to make any extraneous moves.
Forgive me, Double. You'll have to go first.
Eradicating threat.
Ven broke free of the bone giant and charged Sargal, his colossal footfall shaking the patio with every step. Sargal turned his staff on Ven, and necromantic flames poured out. Ven raised an arm to block, and the beam slammed into it. The green flames burned through, and his boulder-sized hand fell to the ground with a crash. But he continued his charge undaunted as the disintegrating fire got to his chest. The Colossus was nearly on him when Sargal dragged the beam down, and it severed Ven's right leg, sending him to the patio with a thunderous boom. Finally, Sargal's spell ended, and he looked with disgust at the Colossus before him. But Ven didn't give in. He began to pull himself towards Sargal with his one remaining arm.
Eradicate.
He continued to report as he closed to nearly grabbing range.
Protect the Matriarch. Eradicate.
The Matriarch had to fight back tears as the words boomed in her mind. She drew furiously, only a few more runic letters. Her Drakebone chalk, the one Ven had brought her, was nearly used up. Ven reached out to grab Sargal, but he was stopped as the bone giant closed its hands around Ven's head and torso. Sargal looked from the Colossus to the bone giant.
So loyal, and yet so futile. Bone giant, get rid of it.
The double watched in horror as Ven was lifted over the giant's head. It carried him over to the ledge and heaved. As Ven began to fall, he reached out with his one arm and grabbed hold of the bone giant's neck. It was pulled toward the ledge and tried to catch itself.
If I go,
Ven declared, his rubyless eyes fixed on the bone giant's baleful sockets.
you go with me.
The bone giant's hand slipped, and they both tumbled over the edge.
Ven!
She tried to catch him with telekinesis, but it was no use.
Goodbye, Matriarch. I hope my 91,250 days of service was to your satisfaction.
The connection cut as the being known as Ven ceased to be. She stared at the ledge where her adorable little golem had disappeared. Sargal let out a bellowing laugh.
Look at you. It's pathetic. So forlorn over a simple summon.
Your service was perfect. I will not let your sacrifice be in vain, my loyal little golem.
Still biting back tears, the double turned toward Sargal. Her sclera flashed black, and her eyes blazed with fury.
You!
She growled.
There isn't a member of this house who wouldn't recognize your cruelty.
She aimed her staff at the demon who was once her friend.
By my name, Xaramaliss Perpetuum, Matriarch of House Perpetuum, the ones called Eternal, I make you this solemn vow. No matter what you have planned, whatever dark cruelty you have in mind, I will see you fall.
The traitor tilted his head.
So brave, so righteous. Do you feel better now?
He mocked. The double smiled.
Oh, yes. Yes, I do. Because you just reminded me of an old tale. When the dust had settled and the fires had died, Perpetuum was free of the old god's enslavement, and the time of demonkind had come.
As the matriarch completed the last rune, she sent Pyrite a telepathic message. The stones surrounding her crumbled away, and she stood. She raised her arms, and the circle erupted with brilliant purple light. A far-off roar rang out. The ritual had begun. Segrid turned to his honor guard, his voice desperate.
Go! Ignore him and stop the summoning!
He dropped his broken sword and aimed his outstretched palm at Pyrite, magic beginning to appear around it. Pyrite braced. His barrier was gone, and his anti-magic rune long since burned out. Suddenly, there was a screeching cry, and Pyrite looked to see a gargoyle, the one that had taken the electrical blast earlier, soar out from the raging blizzard. It latched onto Segrid's arm and started slashing. The second honor guard turned toward the struggling lord, raised his axe over his head, and threw. The axe tumbled, end over end, and sliced through the gargoyle. It went limp and fell to the ground, head no longer attached. But it had done enough. The tome was shredded, small pieces of ancient parchment falling away. Pyrite gave silent thanks to the loyal creature and raised his glaive to guard. The Matriarch had started the ritual, but it would need time to complete. He had to buy that time. The second honor guard pulled a sword from a scabbard on his hip and followed Akadoth toward Pyrite. Pyrite glanced at his glaive's curved blade and sighed. He loved this weapon. It had been his favorite since his contract with House Equitarius. But against the two armored juggernauts, it simply wasn't enough. He focused on it and forced mana he didn't have, into it. He felt his scraps of stamina burn in place of his absent mana, felt his withering strength wane to feed his demand. The head began to change and shrink, the metal condensing into a sphere. Spikes extended from the spherical head, and Pyrite let out a breath. His old friend's morning star complete. Osrin, I'm gonna borrow this for a bit. He smiled, as he knew what the zealot would have said. The two honor guards sprinted toward him. They were slower than before, but they were still fast enough. Pyrite jumped back, trying to gain the advantage of height. Akadoth reached him first, his deadly axe reaching out in a heavy overhead swing. Pyrite dodged the blow, sidestepping the deadly blade and swung low, the Morningstar Great Mace slamming into the demon's red-scaled chestplate. The spiked head crushed in, and a shower of shattered scales fell clattering to the steps. They shattered? Pyrite thought. Akadoth staggered back, growling. The second guard crashed into Pyrite, shoulder-charging him down onto the steps. The honor guard fell upon him, but Pyrite planted his boot on the demon's abdomen and kicked him off. Before Pyrite could get back to his feet, Akadoth's axe swung down toward him again. Pyrite rolled out of the way and watched as the axe burned deep into the brick stairs. Pyrite grabbed the haft, holding it in place, and, one-handed, thrust his Morningstar into Akadoth's skull mask. The blow rocked his head back, and he smacked the mace aside. The red demon wrenched his axe free of Pyrite's grip and raised it for another strike. Pyrite drew from his fury and exploded forward off the steps and into Akadoth, catching the descending blow on the haft of his weapon before it had gained any speed. Akadoth pressed down harder. He didn't need any force for the arcane weapon to do damage. It just had to touch. Pyrite was about to sidestep, let the axe fall harmlessly to the side, when he saw the gleaming sword blade coming for his face. Pyrite released his block and jumped back, further up the steps and away from the second honor guard's strike. But as he did, the axe fell, its magic-infused blade catching the edge of his dented chestplate. It burned through and scored the flesh beneath. Pyrite howled in pain. He backed up a few more steps, looking down at the gash in his chest. It wasn't deep, merely a glancing blow, but it hurt. The smell of burnt flesh wafted up from his smoking chestplate, and he had to swallow the nausea it induced. The honor guard didn't delay. They followed him up the steps. Akadoth came at him again, axe swinging toward Pyrite's left. Simultaneously, the second honor guard came from the right. Pyrite jumped back again, and the blows swung through the air before him. He had to focus on the axe, but without his helmet, the second honor guard could kill him just as easily. He needed to separate them, but if he focused on one, the other would pass him by and go after the Matriarch. As he considered, they approached again, weapons raised. Pyrite decided, and launched forward with his failing strength into the second honor guard. The guard met his charge and caught his descending Morningstar at the base of his blade. It gave a sonorous clang, but before the guard could strike back, Pyrite kicked him in the chest, sending him staggering back down the stairs. Akadoth's axe swung at him. Pyrite reached out and caught it by its haft, careful not to touch its ravenous blade. The force from the swing sent a shock of pain through his hand and up his arm. He held the axe just barely away from his chest. Suddenly, Akadath pulled the axe, and Pyrite with it, slamming his armored head into Pyrite's. The blow shattered his nose and blurred his vision. He struggled to stay upright.
It would be so easy to close my eyes. So tired,
he thought. An image of the Matriarch appeared in his mind, and his eyes snapped open. Akadath pressed the axe closer to Pyrite's chest. Pyrite growled with effort and kneed Akadath between his armored legs. The demon grunted from the strike, but didn't give in. He ripped his axe away from Pyrite and readied to swing it again. Pyrite was faster. He slammed his mace down onto the ridged helmet of the demon and felt the metal cave. As he pulled the strike back, the spikes left small holes behind. Akadath stopped mid-swing and took a few steps back. He shook his head, trying to clear the shock of the impact. Pyrite swung again, sweeping low to catch Akadath on the faceplate. He saw the axe coming only a split second before it hit. It was only enough time to move so that it didn't cleave his head in two. The axe bit into his gorget and Pyrite cried out. He felt something crack beneath his layers of armor, and his left arm went limp. He looked down the haft of the axe to see Segrid standing beside him. Pyrite had been so focused on Akadath, he hadn't even seen the Lord approach. Segrid pulled the axe back and raised it again. For a moment, some part of Pyrite's mind thought the Lord looked strange, wielding such a brutal weapon. But then again, his bloodied face did seem to match it rather well. Pyrite dismissed the stray thought and tried to step back, to retreat further up the steps. But as he did, he found no step, and fell back onto the patio, having reached the top. Segrid glanced over at the second honor guard. The two traded weapons, and, as Akadath got a hold of himself, all three stepped onto the patio after Pyrite. Pyrite heard a thunderous crash from behind him. When he looked, he saw a massive burst of lightning rip across the patio. At its source, he saw Sargal, arms raised and staffs spitting the electrical blast. And, at the other end of the purple light, he saw the Matriarch's double, with a barrier raised before her. He noticed that the double was injured, bleeding from her abdomen. And behind her was her actual body, her own staff raised and glowing as she cast the summoning. Once more, a distant roar rang out over the thunder and wind. Just a little longer, Pyrite thought as he got back to his feet. His mind went to the crystal that sat in the pouch on his belt. He knew full well what using it would mean. It's why he hadn't. Because if he did, he would have minutes at best to end the fight. He took a few more steps back, giving himself time to think. Akadath didn't let him. The scale-clad demon rushed in, axe swinging low. He had clearly recovered from the earlier strike. Pyrite tried to raise the Morningstar to guard, but his left arm merely twitched. Panic gripped him, and he used all of the strength in his right arm to swing the Morningstar into the oncoming axe. It was a pathetic excuse for a parry, but he didn't have any better alternatives. The mace smacked into the axe, diverting its course, if only slightly. Rather than bisecting him from hip to shoulder, it glanced off his pauldron, narrowly missing his ear as he craned his head out of the way. Akadath stopped the axe mid-swing and reversed it, bringing it back down the same path. Pyrite could do nothing. He watched as the axe sliced into his shoulder, felt as the blade ignited and burned its way through him. His eyes closed as he slumped to the ground. The scale-clad demon rushed in, axe swinging low. He had clearly recovered from the earlier strike. Pyrite took a breath. What? This had just happened. He saw the swing coming, knew its path. He dodged it, letting it slip a finger's width from his chest and face. As the axe hung in the air, Akadath began the reversal. Pyrite swung out, twisting his body to force the Morningstar forward. It crashed into the already shattered scales of Akadath's chestplate. The demon growled as more scales crushed to dust under the blow. Pyrite jumped back and found himself at the glowing edge of the summoning circle. What just happened? I died! I know I did! He tried to make sense of what he had just witnessed. And that was when he noticed the traces of magic flowing toward him from the Matriarch's double.
Focus! I can't do that again!
She shouted in his mind. The three came at him. He didn't have any other play. No other plan or tactic. He dropped the Morningstar, grabbed the crystal from its pouch, and crushed it against his rent chestplate. Magical energy exploded out. The prismatic light blinded his assailants and stopped their charge before blowing them back. White fire consumed Pyrite and he cried out. It hurt. It hurt more than anything he had ever felt. He opened his eyes and energy poured from them. He fell to his knees, clutching at the air. He could feel the veins of mana that ran through him like blood vessels fill and stretch. The power of a spellweaver burned within him. It was too much. He had known it would be too much. But this was so much worse than he had imagined. It felt like he would explode. With ragged breaths, he rose back to his feet. The pain remained, but he didn't have time to waste on pain. He felt his shoulder repair, not from healing magic, as such a thing was never granted them by the old gods, but by the complete reconstruction of each piece of muscle and bone. So long as there is breath in my body. He took a tentative step forward. I will not let you hurt her! Sargal, his attention now fully turned on Pyrite, raised his staff, and the sky opened to reveal the blazing blue of a star. Pyrite's weapon appeared in his hand, only it wasn't a glaive. Where once was the curved blade, formed a blazing gem. Just as he started to be lifted off his feet, and his armor started to smolder, he raised his staff to the sky, and a barrier opened against the portal, holding back the star's blinding fury. The Matriarch's double slammed the base of her staff against the brick, and all at once, the portal collapsed. Sargal turned back to his true target and began to cast his next spell. Pyrite couldn't focus on it, as Akadath was coming again, with Segrid and the other honor guard close behind. They swung at him from every angle, and Pyrite's helmet closed around his face. The Matriarch poured her mana into the circle. She could feel it draining into the summoning. On the far side of the patio, the deity controlling Sargal glared through his eyes at her. Any semblance of her old friend had faded.
You think this matters? You think you've won because you started this disgusting excuse for magic?
The monster's voice twisted with rage.
You will kneel in my presence, slave.
He stretched out his hand and, as if grasping hold of something, clenched it shut. The Matriarch felt her spine seize. She felt discs pop and displace. She nearly crumpled to the ground, and would have if she were any other demon. But she was Xaramaliss Perpetuum, Matriarch of House Perpetuum, and she would not kneel to anyone, especially not a fallen god. She remained standing, her body held up by her telekinetic magic. She continued the ritual, and more of the Hellbeast's titanic form began to appear. The double appeared from the billowing white curtain of snow. She barreled into the cruel god, only she didn't. Rather, she flew straight through him before a blast of unseen energy smashed into her, sending her sliding across the summoning circle. She looked to see the form of Sargal distort before vanishing completely as another Sargal appeared further to the side. Sargal opened his mouth, but no words came out. Instead, the words smashed into her mind, overriding her own mental defenses and imprinting themselves where they wished.
You demons,
boomed the dark voice.
Always thinking you have it all figured out. The arrogance of your disgusting, grasping little species. I told Alphion you were a mistake. I told them all the risk you posed. But they didn't listen. They never listen.
The Matriarch felt nauseous as the dark god's deafening voice thundered in her ears. She felt herself grow faint.
Get out of my head, tyrant!
Sargal walked forward and stood over the fallen double, pinning her staff to the brick with his foot. He reached back with his staff and swung it down toward her. The Matriarch and double screamed as the soul lash ripped across their conjoined soul, and the Matriarch felt something in her consciousness snap.
You will listen when I speak. I will suffer your arrogance no longer, for my plan.
The old god paused and glanced past Pyrite as he held back both honor guard with his newfound magic. It stared at Segrid like a predator stares at its next meal. That wicked smile crossed its face.
Is complete.
Both the double and the matriarch stared at Sargal. It reached out its staff and raised it to the sky. What began as white light turned black as dark energy started to pour from the staff.
I call upon you.
Reality began to distort behind the puppeted demon.
Hear my plea and answer my will.
The matriarch, barely able to spare the focus, reached out with her hand and telekinetically pulled the double away from the old god. She recognized this spell. It was as old as it was forbidden. As old as demonkind itself. It was a spell that would mean the death of everyone present.
Heus of death and decay, of fate and what will be. Heed me.
The distorted reality behind Sargal twisted until at last it resembled an enormous set of closed eyes. The double pushed herself to her feet, fighting off both the horrible pain of her twisted spine and damaged soul. Just behind her, the Hellbeast manifested, and a low growl permeated her entire being. And she felt, just for a moment, her mana swell.
Cast me your gaze and grant me your power. Hear me as I say.
She would only have minutes, but that had to be enough. The staff in Sargal's hand dissolved as the eyes behind him began to part. He raised his hands and exclaimed,
Open the eyes of Heus.
Halt the sands of time!
The double turned her staff, and the hourglass obeyed. All was still. The world around her, cast in inverted colors, froze as the hourglass completed its turn. Beside her, Pyrite was motionless, glaring at his opponents. Segrid, just rising to his feet from where Pyrite had thrown him, stood immobile, his eyes wide with distress. And before her, Sargal still had his arms raised, the eyes behind him only partially opened. She tried not to look into their Stygian depths, for she knew that even if only partially enacted, the power of the god of death could easily destroy her, or at least drive her mad. But she didn't have time to focus on that. Her mana was trickling down like the sands it held still. She walked toward Sargal, and as she drew close, she saw the threads. Attached to him, like strings to a puppet, were faint lines of magical thread. She followed them up to the puppeteer high above. It towered over them, a figure of starlight taken form. As her eyes focused on the god, she swore its face changed. But finally, she realized it wasn't a god, but a goddess, as she saw the features in that leering smile.
Amadus. Goddess of enchantment.
That made sense. Of course, the goddess of enchantment would have been the one to corrupt and then puppet Sargal. The double pointed her staff toward the air behind Sargal and poured her dwindling mana into it. She had planned on killing Sargal. That was the only way to free him of Amadus' enslavement, after all. But that was no longer possible. Magic, like what he had just started to cast, was forbidden because it was not just magic, but a direct request of the gods. And, as with anything to do with the old gods, it exacted a heavy price. Sargal was no longer able to die. He was, for all intents and purposes, immortal. But he would, from now until eternity, decay endlessly. Always aware of the pain of his body turning to dust, but powerless to stop it. The double imagined a place. She imagined darkness. She imagined silence. And then that place existed. Unable to kill him and give him eternal rest, she would have to put him in a place where the gods would be unable to reach him. The portal opened, and the pocket dimension she had created showed through in its eternal darkness. She looked at Sargal, her eyes misted with regret. She laid her forehead against his and whispered,
Thank you for everything you've done for our house.
Her vision clouded, and she closed her eyes.
Forgive me for not realizing. Forgive me for not being able to save you. But know that Perpetuum, no, all of Perpetuum will endure.
And with that, she pushed him in. The moment he crossed the boundary, the lines of magic snapped. He floated deeper into the space, and then he blinked.
Zara,
He asked.
her voice. It's gone. Thank you.
She snapped the portal shut and glared up at the fallen goddess. Her fury burned with the hatred of eons. All of House Perpetuum, all of demonkind, flared in the depths of her blazing red eyes.
It is said
She began, knowing the tyrant above her would hear.
that one day the old gods will return. Most have forgotten and carry on their lives, ignorant of what approaches. But not I, not House Perpetuum. We know your return spells the end of us all, should it be allowed.
She glanced at her son, frozen in his desperate last stand. Her gaze softened.
All that we love.
She turned her glare back upon the goddess.
We stand ready, as we always have and always will. So know this, you cruel god, who knows only hatred and domination. When the end comes, eternity shall rise to face it.
Pyrite caught both the axes with a barrier, leaving Akheroth sparking viciously. At the same time, he sent a blast of pure mana into Segrid, and he was sent skidding back. Akheroth swung at the barrier again and again, each time showering Pyrite in sparks. Behind Pyrite, a massive paw appeared and stepped onto the patio, followed by a third mountain-shaking roar. Pyrite cried out as the pain got worse, sending shocks through him. It took all he had to remain standing. He had seconds. He had to use this mana before it killed him. It wouldn't be hard, though, because he was burning through it far faster than usual. He dropped the barrier, and both axes came at him. He opened his hand, and a portal ripped open before him. As the axe blades were consumed, he snapped it shut, leaving both honor guard holding only the darkwood hafts. Pyrite dropped into guard and brought back his staff, as it reformed into its familiar curved blade. Pyrite was not a caster, not really. His lack of mana had been the sole source of most of his life's hardships. Ostracization, bullying, and failed expectations had been the gift of his so-called failure. He tightened his grip and felt the magic flow. The edge of the blade began to glow a deep purple. But despite his failings, he had long fantasized about what he would do with his magic if he had it. The Matriarch had her powers of creation. Zagil had the void. Oz had his fire. But Pyrite was not like them. He wasn't a caster like them. He wasn't the caster Perpetuum had expected him to be. Pyrite was a warrior. He swung out, the magic leaving a trail as it swept in an arc toward the second honor guard. The guard tried to jump back, but found his way blocked by a barrier. There would be no escaping this. The guard caught the blade on his vambrace and screamed as the displacing edge teleported each individual atom out of the way. The blade cleaved through the arm and into the guard's body. His screams were cut short as Pyrite cut through the other side. Pyrite continued the swing, cutting straight toward Akheroth. A part of him grieved that it had come to this, but he found solace that he was freeing his old friend from eternal enslavement. When the blade contacted the red scales, it stopped. Pyrite's eyes went wide. Dragon scale! Then aloud he said, "No!" He swung again, this time from above, but as the blade slammed into the metal helmet, the spell died. It had burned through too much mana to sustain any longer. Akheroth gave no response as the blade clanged off his helmet. He grabbed Pyrite's weapon by the haft and pulled him in before kicking him so hard his chest armor collapsed, caving into his chest. Pyrite was sent flying back. Pyrite's vision fluttered on the edge of darkness. No, he thought. It can't end like this. As he flew, he saw Segrid standing off to the side. He watched as the Matriarch's double appeared behind Segrid and grabbed him before she turned to stone, holding the Lord securely in place. Mustering the last of the mana, he felt a new weapon form in his hand. But it wasn't his glaive, or his winged spear, or even the morning star. It was the spear of another. Inamed, guide my hand, he whispered, cast the delayed spell, and threw, as his eyes closed. The Matriarch watched as the spear left Pyrite's hand. It shot towards Segrid as a blurred line. As it did, the red honor guard jumped in front of his lord, ready to catch the oncoming spear. But as his hands closed around its haft, it vanished, and his arm swung through empty air. There was a gasping cry, and they both looked to see the spear protruding from the Lord's chest. There was no blood, as it had teleported directly into him. Wide-eyed with a mix of fury and horror, Lord Segrid Imperiosus went limp in the stone arms of the double. The Matriarch's attention turned back to Pyrite. He was coming right at her. In that moment, her entire focus became the will to save her son. She stepped in, arms raised to catch him. But as she did, she stepped into the summoning circle, and it erupted with light that consumed them both. She felt them rip through the damaged veil of reality. They plunged into the place between dimensions. And, in another moment, they slipped through and were someplace else. Pyrite slammed into her, and she felt horrific pain shoot through her bones. She collapsed with her unconscious son. She looked around.
What just happened?
Around her rose tall trees. At her feet was thick undergrowth. Numerous small creatures, shocked by the sudden appearance of the demons, scurried off squealing. They were in a forest, but not one that she recognized.